My name is Ryan Thompson, and I'm 32 years old. My wife and I had been married for nearly 2 years. I truly believed we had a perfect life. We had built a comfortable home together, shared dreams for the future, and I thought our marriage was strong. But one ordinary evening, I discovered the truth that would shatter everything I believed in. I found out my wife was having an affair, and the man she was seeing was not just anyone. He was my colleague, and even worse, her ex boyfriend. The moment I realized what was happening, I was devastated. But that was only the beginning. Instead of facing this situation, she turned everything against me. She used every tool at her disposal to destroy my reputation. She posted publicly, twisted the story, and painted me as the villain. She went so far that I lost my job because of the rumors and accusations she spread. The humiliation was overwhelming. Friends distanced themselves. My professional life crumbled almost overnight. I could have broken down. I could have fought back immediately, but I chose a different path. I stayed quiet, endured the pain, and started gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Messages, timestamps, locations. I documented everything carefully and methodically. I knew the day would come when the truth had to be revealed. Not in anger, not in public spectacle, but in the one place where it would matter most, the divorce court. If you like real, intense stories about betrayal in marriage where one person tries to destroy the other, but the truth eventually comes out in the most powerful way, then make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I finally showed all the proof in court. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? I read every single one. A few days after I first suspected something was wrong, the truth hit me hard. I came home early from work one afternoon because a meeting had been canceled. The house was quiet except for the sound of Emma's phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. She had left it there while taking a quick shower. The screen was still lit with a long thread of messages. My stomach dropped as I picked it up and started reading. The messages were intimate and frequent. She had been meeting Noah Brooks, my colleague from the marketing team, for several weeks. They talked about sneaking away during lunch breaks, meeting at hotels, and even joked about how easy it was to hide everything from me. Even worse, Noah wasn't just any colleague, he was her ex-boyfriend from college. The one she had told me was completely in the past. I stood there frozen, scrolling through weeks of conversations. My wife of nearly 2 years had been lying to me the entire time. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. When she walked into the kitchen and saw me holding her phone, her face turned pale for a split second. Then instead of apologizing or explaining, she immediately switched to attack mode. "You're always so controlling," she snapped, snatching the phone from my hand. "You never trust me. This is why I had to hide it from you. You make everything about you." Before I could even respond, she started typing furiously on her phone. Within hours, she posted a long, emotional thread on her social media accounts. She portrayed herself as the victim of an oppressive, jealous husband who didn't support her independence or her career. She used strong feminist language to twist the story, claiming I was emotionally abusive and trying to control her life. She tagged several influencers and even some of my coworkers. By the next morning, the post had spread like wildfire. People I worked with began looking at me differently in the office. Whispers followed me down the hallways. My boss called me into a meeting later that day and said the company had received multiple complaints about creating a toxic environment. I tried to explain what was really happening, but the damage was already done. The narrative Emma had built was powerful and one-sided. 2 days later, HR asked me to pack my things. I was fired. Emma didn't stop there. She continued posting daily, sharing carefully edited screenshots of old arguments and painting me as the villain. Friends I had known for years started distancing themselves. Some unfollowed me. Others sent messages saying they were disappointed in me. My professional reputation was crumbling in real time, and Emma seemed proud of it. She told mutual friends that I'd forced her into the affair by being emotionally unavailable and unsupportive of her ambitions. The humiliation was overwhelming. Every notification on my phone brought new accusations, new people turning against me. I felt isolated and powerless. The woman I had loved and trusted had chosen to destroy me rather than face what she had done. She even went live on social media one evening, crying about how hard it was to be married to someone who didn't let her be herself. I could have broken down. I could have fought back publicly on social media, but I made a different choice. I stayed quiet. I endured the pain and the stares, and while she was busy celebrating her victory online, I started collecting evidence quietly and methodically. I saved every post, every message, every timestamp. I recorded our conversations when she came home to gloat about how everyone believed her story. I kept a detailed log of dates, times, and exactly what she said and did. I knew this was going to get worse before it got better, but I also knew that if I stayed calm and built an airtight case, the truth would eventually come out in the one place where facts still mattered, the divorce court. The nights were the hardest. I lay awake thinking about how quickly my life had fallen apart. The woman I'd shared a home with had turned into someone I barely recognized. Yet I refused to let her win. I kept working on my evidence folder every single night, adding new files, organizing timelines, and backing everything up in multiple places. Little by little, the picture became clearer and more damning. Emma and Noah thought they had complete control of the narrative. They believed I was too broken and humiliated to fight back. They had no idea I was preparing for the moment when everything would be revealed under oath. The weeks that followed my discovery were some of the hardest I had ever experienced. Emma continued her campaign without mercy. Every day she posted new content carefully worded to make herself look like the victim and me the villain. She talked about emotional abuse, controlling behavior, and how she had finally found the courage to speak out. Her followers grew rapidly. Comments poured in supporting her, calling me toxic and insecure. Some of my former colleagues even liked and shared her posts. I lost more than my job. Several clients I had worked with for years suddenly stopped responding to my messages. Friends I thought I could count on began making excuses when I tried to meet them. The isolation was crushing. At night, I would sit in the living room with my laptop watching the damage spread online while Emma slept peacefully in the bedroom we once shared. But I refused to react publicly. Instead, I focused on building my case. I created a private folder on my computer and started saving everything. Screenshots of her posts, timestamps of when she met Noah, deleted messages I managed to recover, and recordings of our conversations when she came home boasting about how everyone believed her story. I was careful, methodical, and completely silent. One evening, she came home late again. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she had been with Noah. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, and said with a smile, "You know, people are finally seeing the real you. Maybe this is good for you time to reflect on how you treat women." Her tone was casual, almost triumphant. I stayed quiet and let her talk. Every word she said I recorded on my phone, hidden in my pocket. The next day I met Kevin, my closest friend, at a small cafe far from our neighborhood. I showed him some of the evidence I had collected so far. He was shocked. "Ryan, this is insane. She's not just cheating, she's trying to destroy you." He offered to help me organize the files and even suggested contacting a lawyer quietly. I told him I wasn't ready to file for divorce yet. I needed more proof enough to make sure she couldn't twist the story again in court. As the days passed, Emma's attacks became more aggressive. She started tagging my former company in her posts, claiming they had protected a toxic man. The pressure on my professional network intensified. I received messages from people I barely knew accusing me of things I never did. The humiliation was constant. Yet every night after she fell asleep, I continued my work. I cross-referenced dates, saved location data from her phone backups, and even recovered deleted photos from cloud storage. The more I gathered, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated effort to ruin me while protecting her own image. One afternoon, while Emma was out, I found a notebook she had left in the drawer. Inside were notes about what to say in her next post, how to frame me as the abuser, and even ideas on how to get more followers by playing the victim card. I photographed every page. I knew I was getting closer to having an unbreakable case, but I also knew I had to be patient. One wrong move could let her spin the narrative again. The tension in the house was unbearable. We barely spoke anymore. When we did, it was cold and filled with accusations. She believed she was winning. I let her think that. Because the day I walked into that divorce courtroom, I would be ready. The tension in the house was unbearable. We barely spoke anymore. When we did, it was cold and filled with accusations. She believed she was winning. I let her think that. Because the day I walked into that divorce courtroom, I would be ready. I continued my silent work every single night. While Emma slept, I sat in the guest room with my laptop, organizing the growing collection of evidence. I had screenshots of every post. She made timestamps of her meetings with Noah, recovered deleted messages and hours of secret recordings, where she openly admitted what she was doing and bragged about how she was destroying my reputation. One night she came home particularly late. She didn't even bother making up an excuse. She walked into the living room, saw me sitting there, and smiled. "You know, Ryan, people are starting to see who you really are. Maybe this is the wake-up call you needed." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. I stayed quiet and let her talk. Every word she said I recorded. The next morning, she posted another long thread. This time, she claimed I had been emotionally abusive for years and that she had finally found the courage to leave. She included old arguments I didn't even remember, twisted them completely, and tagged several large feminist accounts. By afternoon, the post had thousands of shares. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications from people I barely knew. I lost another freelance opportunity that week. A client I had worked with for over a year suddenly canceled our contract, saying they didn't want to be associated with controversy. The financial pressure was mounting. I was burning through my savings faster than I expected, but every setback only made me more determined. I met Kevin again at a quiet coffee shop on the other side of the city. I showed him the latest evidence I had collected. He shook his head in disbelief. "This is beyond cheating, Ryan. She's trying to erase you. You need to protect yourself." He helped me organize the files into clear folders with dates and descriptions. He also suggested I start speaking with a divorce lawyer quietly just to understand my options. I took his advice. I found a lawyer named Mr. Harrington who specialized in high conflict divorces. During our first meeting, I laid out everything. He listened carefully and told me that if I could prove the affair and the deliberate campaign to damage my reputation, we had a strong case for both the divorce settlement and potential defamation claims. From that point on, I became even more careful. I backed up every file in multiple secure locations. I started noting every financial impact her actions had caused: lost jobs, canceled contracts, therapy sessions I had to attend because of the stress. I kept receipts for everything. Emma, meanwhile, grew more confident. She started going out almost every night, sometimes not coming home until early morning, and she would post photos with friends smiling like she was living her best life while I was falling apart. She even hinted in one post that she might be moving on with someone new, though everyone knew it was Noah. One evening she came home and found me reviewing documents at the dining table. She laughed and said, "Still trying to play detective. It's pathetic, Ryan." "No one believes you?" She took a photo of me sitting there and posted it with the caption, "When they can't accept the truth." The comments were brutal. I didn't argue with her. I simply saved the post and added it to my folder. The weeks turned into a strange kind of routine. During the day, I looked for new freelance work and tried to keep my head above water financially. At night, I built my case. I knew the divorce papers would be served soon, and when that happened, I wanted to be completely prepared. I was no longer the man who was shocked and heartbroken. I had become someone who was quiet, focused, and ready. The day the divorce process officially began, I walked into the lawyer's office with a thick binder of evidence. Mr. Harrington looked through it and nodded slowly. "This is very strong," he said. "When we present this in court, it will change everything." I didn't smile. I just felt a cold sense of determination. Emma thought she had destroyed me. She had no idea what was coming. Emma thought she had destroyed me. She had no idea what was coming. The divorce process moved faster than I expected. Mr. Harrington filed the papers, and within 2 weeks we had our first court date for the initial hearing. Emma arrived at the courthouse looking confident, dressed sharply, and surrounded by 2 friends who kept posting supportive messages on social media. She clearly believed this would be another opportunity to paint herself as the victim. When we entered the courtroom, the judge asked both sides to present their positions. Emma's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of an unhappy marriage where Emma had been emotionally suppressed and finally found the courage to seek happiness elsewhere. He mentioned emotional abuse and controlling behavior multiple times, echoing everything Emma had posted online. She sat there with tears in her eyes, playing the role perfectly. Then it was my turn. Mr. Harrington stood up calmly and said, "Your Honor, we have substantial evidence that contradicts this narrative." He asked permission to present the materials I had prepared. The judge nodded. I watched as the projector displayed the first piece of evidence, clear screenshots of messages between Emma and Noah, including dates, times, and explicit content. The courtroom grew quiet. Emma's face changed instantly. Her lawyer tried to object, saying the evidence was obtained illegally, but the judge overruled him after confirming the messages were from her own phone and cloud backup. Next came the recordings. Mr. Harrington played several clips where Emma openly admitted the affair and bragged about how she was ruining my reputation. In one recording, she laughed and said, "He deserves this. Let him lose everything." The judge listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each clip. Then came the most damaging part. I had compiled a detailed timeline showing how Emma's social media campaign directly led to me losing my job. Screenshots of her posts tagging my company emails from HR, mentioning the public complaints and statements from former colleagues who admitted they had been influenced by her posts. Mr. Harrington also presented financial records showing the income I had lost because of the smear campaign. Emma's lawyer tried desperately to argue that her posts were protected free speech and that I was exaggerating, but the judge wasn't convinced. He asked Emma directly if she had posted those things. She hesitated, then admitted she had, claiming she was just expressing her truth. The courtroom atmosphere shifted completely. What started as Emma's stage quickly became her downfall. After both sides presented, the judge scheduled a full trial date but made it clear he was leaning heavily toward my side based on the evidence shown. As we left the courtroom, Emma's confident mask had cracked. She glared at me with pure hatred and whispered, "You'll regret this." Noah was waiting for her outside. When he saw the look on her face, he knew something had gone very wrong. I walked past them without saying a word. Over the next few weeks, the pressure on Emma and Noah intensified. Her followers began questioning her story after some of the evidence leaked online through neutral accounts. Several brands that had worked with her as an influencer quietly dropped her. Noah's company also started an internal investigation after learning about the affair with a colleague's wife. I continued preparing for the full trial. Mr. Harrington told me we had a very strong case, not only for divorce, but also for potential compensation for defamation and lost wages. I wasn't focused on money. I just wanted the truth to be officially recognized. One evening, Emma came to the house unannounced. She looked exhausted and desperate. For the first time, she didn't attack. She asked if we could talk privately. I let her in, but kept my distance. She tried to apologize, saying she had lost control and that things had gone too far. She asked me to drop the stronger claims so she could keep some dignity. I listened quietly, then told her the time for talking had passed. The evidence would speak for itself in court. She left crying, but I felt nothing but calm resolve. The full trial lasted 3 days. By the end, the judge had seen enough. He ruled in my favor on all major points. The divorce was granted. Emma was ordered to pay a significant portion of my lost income in legal fees. Her public campaign was officially recognized as damaging and intentional. When the verdict was read, Emma broke down. Noah, who had attended the final day, looked pale and defeated. Their perfect plan had completely backfired. A few weeks later, I heard that Noah had lost his job after the company's investigation. Emma deleted most of her social media accounts and moved to a smaller city to escape the backlash. As for me, I finally felt free. A few weeks later, I heard that Noah had lost his job after the company's investigation. Emma deleted most of her social media accounts and moved to a smaller city to escape the backlash. As for me, I finally felt free. The courtroom victory brought a strange kind of quiet. There were no more late-night arguments, no more posts attacking me, no more fear of what Emma would do next. The divorce was finalized quickly after the judge's ruling. I was granted the house and a fair settlement that covered my lost income and legal fees. Emma was ordered to pay a significant amount, though I knew collecting it might take time. For the first time in months, I could breathe without that constant weight on my chest. I started rebuilding slowly. I updated my resume and began applying for new positions. The smear campaign had damaged my reputation in Chicago, so I focused on opportunities in neighboring suburbs and even considered relocating if needed. A few companies reached out after hearing what had happened, impressed by how I had handled the situation professionally and legally. Kevin remained a steady support. He helped me practice interviews and reviewed my new portfolio. One evening over beers, he told me, "You didn't just survive this, Ryan. You came out stronger." Most people would have broken. His words meant more than he knew. At home, the atmosphere gradually changed. I cleaned out the closet and removed the last traces of Emma's things. I repainted the living room a lighter color and rearranged the furniture. The house started to feel like mine again, a place of peace instead of tension. Willow wasn't in this story, but the quiet nights allowed me to reflect on what kind of future I wanted. I realized I had spent too many years trying to make someone else happy while ignoring my own needs. That mistake wouldn't happen again. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a surprising offer, a senior marketing position at a growing company in the suburbs. The salary was better than my previous job, and the team seemed professional and supportive. During the interview, the hiring manager mentioned they had heard about my situation and respected how I had handled it with dignity and evidence rather than public drama. I accepted the offer the same day. Life began to feel normal again. I woke up without dread. I went to work without worrying about what new post Emma might have made. I came home to a quiet house and actually enjoyed the silence. I started cooking proper meals, going for runs in the neighborhood, and reconnecting with old friends who had stayed neutral during the chaos. Emma's life, from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, had taken the opposite path. After the court ruling and the loss of her influencer income, she struggled financially. Brands that once worked with her distanced themselves. She tried to start fresh in another city, but the reputation followed her. Noah fared no better. He was let go from his job and faced difficulties finding new employment in the same industry. I didn't feel joy at their downfall. I felt relief that the chapter was truly closed. One quiet Saturday morning, I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee looking at the spacious yard. The sun was warm, the neighborhood peaceful. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to check my phone for notifications or brace myself for the next attack. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life. I had protected myself with patience and evidence instead of anger, and now I was free to build something better. The lesson I learned was simple but powerful. When someone tries to destroy you, don't fight fire with fire. Gather the truth, stay calm, and let the facts speak in the right place. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it comes completely. I stood up, stretched, and walked back inside the house that finally felt like home again. I was ready for whatever came next on my own terms. I had finally cut the ties completely. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my life had changed more than I ever expected. The new job in the suburbs turned out to be the best professional decision I had made in years. The team was supportive, the workload was challenging but fair, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't have to worry about my reputation being attacked from behind. My colleagues knew only the basic facts that I had gone through a difficult divorce, and they respected my privacy. Slowly, I began to rebuild my professional confidence. I was given more responsibilities, and within 4 months, I received a promotion. The extra income helped stabilize my finances after the difficult period of unemployment. At home, the house in the Chicago suburbs had become truly mine. I repainted the walls a soft, neutral tone, replaced the furniture that carried bad memories, and turned the backyard into a small garden with flowers and a seating area. On weekends, I would sit outside with a book or simply enjoy the quiet. The constant fear that had lived in my chest for so many months was gone. I no longer jumped at every sound or checked my phone fearing new notifications. I stayed in touch with Kevin. He became more than just a friend. He was the one person who had seen me at my lowest and never judged. One evening over dinner at his place, he asked me how I was really doing. I told him the truth. I was healing. The anger had faded. What remained was a quiet determination to never let anyone have that kind of power over my life again. Kevin smiled and said, "You didn't just survive this, Ryan. You came out stronger." Most people would have broken. His words meant more than he knew. Alyssa's life, from what I heard through distant mutual contacts, had continued to deteriorate. After losing her influencer income and facing the court judgment, she had moved to a smaller city in another state. She tried to restart her online presence under a different name, but the scandal followed her. Brands were wary. Followers who once supported her began questioning the story once the court documents became public. She eventually went silent on social media and lived a very private, low-profile life. The woman who had once thrived on attention now avoided it completely. Noah fared no better. After being let go from the company, he struggled to find work in the same industry. The affair and the public exposure had damaged his professional reputation. Last I heard, he had taken a much lower-paying job in a different field far away from Chicago. Both of them had paid a real price for their actions, not just legally, but in reputation, relationships, and peace of mind. I didn't feel joy at their downfall. I felt closure. The biggest lesson I learned from this entire experience is simple but powerful. When someone betrays you and then tries to destroy your life to cover their own mistakes, the best response is not to fight fire with fire. Stay calm. Gather the truth. Present it in the right place with patience and evidence. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but when it does, it comes completely. I learned that my worth was never defined by someone else's lies. I learned that real strength is not in shouting the loudest, but in enduring quietly until the truth can speak for itself. And most importantly, I learned that the healthiest thing you can do after betrayal is to let go completely, not for them, but for yourself. I started dating again slowly and carefully. Nothing serious yet, but the simple act of meeting new people without fear felt like progress. I joined a local hiking group and began traveling on weekends. Small things, but they brought me joy I hadn't felt in years. The house felt lighter, the future felt open. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life. I had protected myself with patience and evidence instead of anger, and now I was free to build something better. 1 year after the divorce was finalized, I stood in the same backyard where everything had once felt so heavy, and I felt nothing but peace. The garden I had planted was blooming beautifully. The house had been fully refreshed. New paint, new furniture, new memories. My job was stable and fulfilling. I'd even received a promotion 6 months ago. Friends who had drifted away during the scandal had slowly returned, and those who didn't were no longer missed. I no longer woke up with anxiety. I no longer checked my phone fearing new attacks. The weight I had carried for so long, the betrayal, the public humiliation, the loss of my job and reputation had been replaced by a quiet strength I didn't know I possessed. Emma and Noah's lives had taken very different paths. From the little I heard, Emma was living a quiet, almost hidden life in another state. Her influencer career had collapsed, and she worked a regular job far from the spotlight. Noah had also left the marketing industry and was struggling to rebuild. Their attempt to destroy me had backfired completely. They lost far more than they gained. I didn't feel joy at their downfall. I felt closure. The biggest lesson I learned from this entire experience is simple but powerful. When someone tries to destroy you, don't fight fire with fire. Gather the truth, stay calm, and let the facts speak in the right place. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it comes completely. I learned that my worth was never defined by someone else's lies. I learned that real strength is not in shouting the loudest, but in enduring quietly until the truth can speak for itself. And most importantly, I learned that the healthiest thing you can do after betrayal is to let go completely, not for them, but for yourself. Today, I live a life I am proud of. I have time for hobbies I had neglected. I travel when I want. I spend weekends with good friends. I am open to new relationships, but only with someone who values honesty and respect. The fear that once controlled me is gone. As I sit here on this quiet evening looking at the peaceful suburban neighborhood I once thought was ruined, I realize how far I've come. The storm that tried to break me didn't win. It made me stronger, wiser, and more determined to protect my peace. I am no longer the man who was betrayed and humiliated. I am the man who survived, fought back with truth, and built a better life on the other side, and that more than anything is the real victory.
Thank you for listening. Let's move on to the next story in the Revenger Stories series.
My name is Mason Donovan, and I'm 32 years old. My family and I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood in Las Vegas, hoping for a fresh start and a peaceful life. We had a loving wife, a bright 7-year-old daughter, and our loyal dog Milo, who had been with us for 5 years. Everything felt promising at first, but that peace didn't last long. Our neighbor's 23-year-old son quickly turned our new home into a nightmare. He thought he was the center of the universe and acted like the entire street belonged to him. He started with small annoyances, throwing rocks at our fence, climbing onto our roof to make noise, and deliberately making our lives miserable. Then his actions became more vicious. He targeted our family, especially our innocent dog Milo. I tried to handle it calmly at first. I spoke to him and his mother multiple times, hoping they would stop, but they only laughed and continued. The situation kept getting worse, and I knew something terrible was coming. I never imagined how far he would go or how much pain he would cause my family. One day, everything reached its breaking point. The neighbor's son did something so cruel and heartless that it shattered our sense of safety forever. That moment changed everything. I realized I couldn't just wait and hope for it to stop. I had to do something. I started collecting proof quietly and carefully because I knew one day the truth would have to come out. If you like raw family stories where ordinary people face unimaginable harassment from their own neighbors and finally fight back with undeniable evidence, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happened when justice was finally served. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever dealt with a toxic neighbor? I read every single one. 2 weeks after we moved into our new home in the Las Vegas suburbs, the trouble began. The first few days had actually felt promising. Alyssa and I spent time unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and making sure Willow had her own little space in the backyard to play. Milo, our 5-year-old dog, was running around the fenced yard with excitement, sniffing every corner as if he was claiming his new territory. The neighborhood looked quiet and family-friendly, with wide streets, well-kept lawns, and kids riding bikes in the distance. We told ourselves this was exactly the fresh start we needed after years of living in a noisy apartment in the city. But on the second Saturday morning, everything changed. I was outside watering the new plants when I heard a loud thud on our roof. I looked up and saw a young man, probably in his early 20s, standing on top of our house. He was throwing small rocks down onto our backyard fence, laughing as they bounced off the wood. I called out to him politely, asking what he was doing. He looked down at me with a smirk and said, "Just having some fun, man. This is my street." His tone was cocky, like he owned the entire neighborhood. That was my first encounter with Jeremy Brooks, the 23-year-old son of our next-door neighbor, Linda. He lived with his mother in the house right beside ours. From that moment on, his behavior escalated quickly. He started climbing our roof almost every evening, stomping around loudly enough to shake the ceiling inside the house. He would yell and laugh, making sure we could hear him. When I went outside to ask him to stop, he would just grin and say, "It's not illegal to walk on a roof, is it?" His mother, Linda, would sometimes stand in her yard watching, never telling him to stop. Within a few days, the small annoyances turned into real damage. Jeremy began throwing larger stones at our fence and windows. One afternoon, a rock cracked one of our back windows while Willow was playing inside. Alyssa was terrified and immediately called me at work. When I got home, I tried to talk to Linda calmly. She stood on her porch with her arms crossed and said, "Boys will be boys. He's just energetic. You're the new people here. Maybe you should learn to relax." Her words were dismissive, and she clearly had no intention of controlling her son. The situation kept getting worse. Jeremy started leaving trash in our yard at night and banging on our fence with a stick whenever he walked by. He would also stand at the edge of our property and stare at Willow while she played, making her feel uncomfortable. I installed a simple security camera on the back porch to keep an eye on things, but I still hoped the problem would settle down if I remained patient. One evening, after another loud incident on the roof, I sat down with Alyssa at the kitchen table. She looked exhausted and worried. "Mason, this is not what we signed up for," she said. "We moved here for peace, not to deal with this kind of harassment every day." I agreed with her completely. We both knew we couldn't keep living like this, especially with Willow in the house. I told her I would try one more time to speak with Linda and Jeremy the next day. The following morning, I walked over to their house and knocked on the door. Linda answered, and Jeremy was standing right behind her. I explained as calmly as I could that their son's behavior was affecting our family and asked them to please stop. Linda's response was immediate and defensive. "My son isn't doing anything wrong. If you don't like it, maybe you should move back to where you came from." Jeremy just laughed and added, "Yeah, new guy. Get used to it." Their attitude made it clear that talking peacefully wasn't going to work. That night after Willow went to bed, Alyssa and I sat down and had a serious conversation. We both agreed that we needed to start documenting everything. I began keeping a detailed log of every incident, dates, times, descriptions of what Jeremy did, and photos of any damage. I also started recording short videos on my phone whenever I heard noise on the roof or saw him throwing things. We knew we might need this evidence later if the situation continued to escalate. Little did we know how bad it was going to get. The next few days after that conversation with Linda and Jeremy felt even more tense. I continued documenting every incident. Every time Jeremy climbed onto our roof, every rock that landed in our yard, every loud bang against the fence, I wrote it down and took photos. Alyssa was becoming more anxious, especially when Willow asked why the boy next door kept making so much noise. We tried to keep things normal for our daughter, but it was getting harder to hide our worry. One sunny Saturday morning, I was in the backyard with Milo while Willow played on her swing set. Alyssa was inside preparing lunch. Milo was running around happily chasing a ball I had thrown for him. He had been with us for 5 years and was a gentle, loving part of our family. Willow loved him dearly and often hugged him before bed. I heard a noise near the fence that separated our yard from Jeremy's. When I looked over, I saw Jeremy standing there watching us with that same smirk I had grown to hate. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared. A few minutes later, he climbed over the fence into our yard when I briefly went inside to get Willow a drink. By the time I came back out, Jeremy was gone, but Milo was nowhere to be seen. I called his name. No response. Willow started looking around too, asking where Milo went. My heart began racing. I searched the entire backyard, then checked the front yard. Nothing. I ran to the fence and looked into Jeremy's yard. That was when I saw it. Milo was lying motionless on the ground near Jeremy's back door. There was blood on the concrete. I jumped over the fence without thinking. When I got closer, the reality hit me hard. Jeremy had brutally harmed our dog. Milo was gone. The sight was devastating. I carried Milo's body back to our yard, my hands shaking. Willow saw me and started crying. Alyssa rushed outside and froze when she saw what had happened. I called the police immediately. When the officers arrived, I showed them the security camera footage I had installed earlier. It clearly captured Jeremy climbing into our yard, grabbing Milo, and taking him away. The footage didn't show the actual moment of harm, but it proved Jeremy had taken our dog without permission. Jeremy's mother, Linda, came out of her house when she saw the police cars. She immediately started defending her son, saying he was just playing around and that we were overreacting. She claimed Milo must have run into their yard on his own. The officers took statements from both sides and said they would investigate. That afternoon, I sat with Alyssa and Willow while they cried. The house felt empty without Milo's usual barking and playful energy. Willow kept asking if Milo was coming back. I didn't know how to explain to a 7-year-old that someone had intentionally hurt her beloved dog. The pain in my chest was mixed with growing anger. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was something much more serious. Later that evening, I reviewed all the footage and notes I had collected. The pattern was undeniable. Jeremy had been escalating for weeks, and now he had crossed a line that could not be ignored. I decided right then that I would not let this go. I would gather every piece of evidence possible, more camera footage, witness statements from other neighbors, and records of all the previous incidents. The police returned the next day and told us they had spoken with Jeremy. He denied everything and laughed when asked about Milo. Linda continued to defend him, saying her son would never do something like that. But the security footage told a different story. The officers said they needed more solid proof before they could make an arrest. Over the following days, I worked methodically. I installed additional cameras around the property. I spoke with other neighbors who had also experienced problems with Jeremy in the past. Several of them agreed to provide statements. I kept a detailed timeline of every event since we moved in. Jeremy didn't stop. He continued making threats and banging on our fence, but now I had cameras recording everything. Each new incident added to the growing pile of evidence. Alyssa supported me fully, though I could see how exhausted and scared she was. We tried to keep Willow's routine as normal as possible, but the shadow of what happened to Milo hung over the entire house. I knew the situation was dangerous. Jeremy was becoming bolder, and his mother's protection only encouraged him, but I refused to let fear control us. I was determined to protect my family and make sure Jeremy faced real consequences for what he had done. The evidence was building, and I could feel the turning point approaching. Over the next 10 days, I became almost obsessive about documenting everything Jeremy did. Every morning before work, I checked the cameras. Every evening when I came home, I reviewed the footage. I saved every video file with clear timestamps and descriptions. Alyssa helped me organize the files on a separate hard drive. We both knew this was no longer just about annoyance. It was about protecting our family from someone dangerous. Jeremy didn't slow down. In fact, he seemed to get bolder after what happened to Milo. He started throwing larger objects at our house. One afternoon, a heavy brick shattered the side window of our garage while Willow was doing homework inside. The sound made her scream. I rushed home from work and found glass scattered across the floor. Another neighbor across the street told me he had seen Jeremy laughing as he walked away. I added the new incident to my growing folder. Photos of the damage, the police report number, statements from the neighbor who witnessed it, everything was carefully dated and labeled. I also began speaking with more people on our street. 3 other families admitted they had problems with Jeremy in the past, but they were too afraid to say anything publicly. They agreed to give me written statements if it ever went to court. Linda, Jeremy's mother, continued to defend him no matter what. Whenever the police came by after a new complaint, she would stand on her porch with her arms crossed and say the same things. My son is a good boy. He's just energetic. These new people are too sensitive. She never once tried to stop him. In fact, she seemed proud of his behavior like it was some kind of game. One night around 2 a.m., the security camera caught Jeremy trying to climb over our back fence again. This time he was carrying a can of spray paint. He managed to write crude words on our shed before the motion light turned on, and he ran away. I saved that footage immediately and sent it to the detective handling our case. The detective told me we were getting closer to having enough for an arrest, but they still needed something more direct. I kept pushing. I installed 2 more cameras, one pointed directly at the fence line and another covering the side of the house. I also bought a cheap trail camera and hid it near the spot where Milo had been taken. Alyssa was struggling. She didn't sleep well anymore and kept checking on Willow during the night. Our daughter had become quieter since Milo disappeared. She asked about him less, but I could see the sadness in her eyes every time she looked at his empty food bowl. We tried to keep her routine, normal school playtime, bedtime stories, but the tension in the house was impossible to hide completely. Then came the night that changed everything. I was reviewing footage from the previous day when I saw Jeremy standing at our back fence again. This time he wasn't alone. He was talking to someone on the phone, laughing loudly. I turned up the volume and heard him say, "Yeah, I took care of their stupid dog. They won't mess with me anymore." My blood ran cold. He had just admitted what he did to Milo on camera. I immediately backed up the file in 3 different places and sent a copy to the detective with a clear timestamp. The next morning, 2 police officers showed up at Jeremy's house with a warrant. I watched from my front window as they handcuffed him and put him in the patrol car. Linda came running out screaming, claiming her son was innocent and that we were framing him. The arrest brought a strange kind of quiet to the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, there was no banging on the roof, no rocks flying over the fence, no laughter in the middle of the night. Willow asked if the mean boy was gone. I told her the police had taken him away because he had done bad things. Alyssa and I sat down that evening and talked about what would happen next. We both agreed we wouldn't feel truly safe until the legal process was finished. I continued organizing every piece of evidence, videos, photos, neighbor statements, police reports. Mr. Petraeus, the lawyer I had consulted earlier, told me the case against Jeremy was getting stronger every day. But I knew Linda wouldn't give up easily. She had already started telling other neighbors that we were lying and harassing her family. She even tried to file a complaint against me for stalking her son with cameras. The police dismissed it quickly once they saw all the footage. The storm wasn't over yet. But for the first time since we moved here, I felt like we were finally fighting back with real power. The storm wasn't over yet. But for the first time since we moved here, I felt like we were finally fighting back with real power. The days after Jeremy's arrest were strangely quiet. No more banging on the roof at night. No more rocks hitting our fence. No more laughter coming from the other side of the yard. The sudden peace felt almost unreal after weeks of constant tension. Alyssa and I tried to bring some normalcy back into the house for Willow. We took her to the park, cooked her favorite meals, and read extra bedtime stories. She still asked about Milo sometimes, but the questions came less frequently. We told her the police were handling it and that we were safe now. Inside, though, we both knew the legal battle was just beginning. Linda Brooks didn't stay silent for long. 2 days after the arrest, she started knocking on doors in the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that her son was innocent and that we were the ones harassing them. She claimed the security footage was fake and that we had set Jeremy up because we didn't like how energetic he was. A few neighbors believed her at first, but most had seen enough of Jeremy's behavior over the years to stay neutral. I kept working quietly. Every evening after Willow went to bed, I reviewed the footage again, organized the timeline, and prepared statements for the detective. Mr. Petraeus, the lawyer I had hired, told me the case was strong. The video of Jeremy admitting what he did to Milo, combined with all the previous incidents, painted a clear picture of ongoing harassment and animal cruelty. Then came the preliminary hearing. I sat in the courtroom with Alyssa while Jeremy was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit. Linda sat in the front row, glaring at us the entire time. The prosecutor presented the security footage and my detailed log of events. Jeremy's public defender tried to argue that the videos were unclear and that my family was overreacting to normal teenage behavior. The judge didn't look convinced. When the judge asked if Jeremy had anything to say, he smirked and said, "They're just mad because I was having fun." That single sentence seemed to seal his fate in the courtroom. The judge set a trial date and denied bail, citing Jeremy as a potential danger to the community. After the hearing, Linda approached us in the hallway. Her face was red with anger. "You think you've won? This isn't over. My son didn't do anything wrong. You're destroying our family over nothing." Alyssa held my hand tightly but stayed quiet. I looked Linda straight in the eyes and said, "Your son killed our dog. He terrorized my family for weeks. This is far from nothing." She didn't have a response. She just turned and walked away. The weeks leading up to the full trial were difficult. Linda continued spreading rumors in the neighborhood. Some people stopped waving at us. Others quietly told me they supported us but were afraid to get involved. I focused on building the strongest case possible. I gathered statements from 3 other neighbors who had dealt with Jeremy before. I also had the vet's official report on Milo's injuries, which clearly showed intentional harm. Alyssa was my rock through all of it. Even though she was scared and exhausted, she helped me organize every document and stayed calm when I felt overwhelmed. Willow seemed to sense the tension but never complained. She started drawing pictures of our family with Milo in heaven, which broke my heart every time I saw them. The trial itself lasted 3 days. I took the stand and described everything that had happened since we moved in the roof. Incidents, the broken windows, the fear in Willow's eyes, and the morning I found Milo. The prosecutor played the key video where Jeremy admitted what he had done. Jeremy's defense tried to paint him as a misunderstood young man, but the evidence was overwhelming. When the verdict came in, the courtroom was silent. Guilty on all counts: animal cruelty, harassment, and attempted burglary from the night he was caught on camera. The judge sentenced Jeremy to 5 years in prison with no early release for good behavior, citing the premeditated nature of his actions and the impact on our family, especially our young daughter. Linda broke down crying in the courtroom. As the officers led Jeremy away, he looked back at us with pure hatred in his eyes. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief that this nightmare was finally ending. After the trial, things moved quickly. Linda put their house up for sale within 2 weeks. She could no longer afford the mortgage without Jeremy's presence, and the neighborhood gossip had become too much for her. We watched from our window as the moving truck arrived one morning. Linda didn't look at our house even once as she drove away for the last time. The day they left, the entire street felt different, quieter, safer. That evening, Alyssa, Willow, and I sat in the backyard together. Willow asked if we could get another dog someday. I told her yes when the time was right. For now, we were going to focus on healing and enjoying the peace we had fought so hard to get back. The day they left, the entire street felt different, quieter, safer. After Linda and Jeremy moved out, a heavy weight seemed to lift from our home. For the first time in months, I didn't wake up checking the security cameras. Alyssa stopped looking over her shoulder every time she stepped into the backyard. Willow started playing outside again without asking if the mean boy was still next door. But the healing didn't happen overnight. The first week after the trial, our daughter had nightmares. She would wake up crying, asking if Milo was okay and if the bad people were coming back. Alyssa and I took turns comforting her. We explained in simple words that the police had taken Jeremy away because he had done very bad things and that he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone else for a long time. Slowly, the nightmares became less frequent. I threw myself into work to keep my mind busy. During the day, I focused on my job, but every evening I continued organizing the mountain of evidence I had collected. Mr. Petraeus told me there might be a civil case we could pursue for damages, but I wasn't sure I wanted to drag the situation out any longer. Alyssa and I talked about it many nights. We both agreed that the most important thing was moving forward, not holding on to anger. 2 weeks after the sentencing, I received a letter from the court. Jeremy had been officially sentenced to 5 years in state prison. The judge had taken into account his previous incidents with other neighbors and the premeditated cruelty toward Milo. Linda had tried to speak during sentencing, begging for leniency, but the judge cut her off, saying her son's actions had caused real harm to a family with a young child. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it away. There was no celebration in our house, just a quiet sense of closure. Alyssa started smiling more. She planted new flowers in the backyard where Milo used to run. Willow helped her, carefully patting the soil around each plant. One afternoon, I watched them from the kitchen window and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, genuine peace. But the neighborhood wasn't completely silent about what happened. A few families quietly thanked me for standing up to Jeremy. They said they had been afraid to speak out before, but now the street felt safer. One older couple even brought over homemade cookies and told us they were glad we didn't give up. Linda sold the house quickly. The new owners were a young family with 2 small children. When they moved in, I made sure to introduce myself and Alyssa politely. They seemed nice and unaware of the house's previous drama. We didn't mention Jeremy. Some things were better left in the past. As the weeks turned into a full month, our daily life slowly returned to normal. Willow went back to laughing loudly while playing in the yard. Alyssa and I started having date nights again, simple dinners at home after Willow went to bed. I even began thinking about getting another dog someday, though we both agreed we would wait until the right time. One evening, as the sun was setting, the 3 of us sat on the back porch together. Willow was drawing a picture of our family. She drew me Alyssa herself and a little brown dog in the corner. When I asked who the dog was, she looked up at me and said, "That's Milo, watching over us from heaven." I felt my throat tighten. Alyssa reached over and squeezed my hand. In that moment, I realized how strong my family had become through all of this. We had faced real fear, real loss, and real injustice, and we had come out the other side together. I no longer carried the constant anger I felt toward Jeremy and Linda. I had let it go, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to it was hurting me and my family more than it was hurting them. We were finally free to live the peaceful life we had moved here for. The first month after Jeremy and Linda moved away passed in a kind of quiet relief. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. Mornings were calm, Evenings were spent together without the constant fear of rocks hitting the windows or footsteps on the roof. Alyssa started sleeping better. She told me one night that she no longer woke up listening for strange noises. Willow began smiling more freely. She started riding her bike up and down the street again, waving at the new neighbors. The shadow that had hung over our home slowly began to fade. But healing wasn't linear. Some days were harder than others. I would catch myself checking the security cameras out of habit, even though there was nothing left to watch for. Willow still occasionally asked about Milo, especially when she saw other dogs being walked in the neighborhood. We answered her questions honestly but gently. We told her Milo had been a brave dog who protected our family and that he was now at peace. I went back to focusing on my work with renewed energy. The constant stress that had drained me for months began to lift. I even started exercising again in the mornings, running through the quiet suburban streets that now felt truly ours. Alyssa and I talked more openly about what we had been through. We admitted how scared we both were during those weeks, especially for Willow. We agreed that moving to Las Vegas had been the right decision for our family, even if the beginning had been painful. We also decided that when the time felt right, we would consider adopting another dog, not to replace Milo, but to bring new joy into our home. 2 months after the trial, I received a final update from Mr. Petraeus. Jeremy's appeal had been denied. He would serve the full 5 years. Linda had moved to a smaller apartment on the other side of the city. The house next door was now occupied by a young couple with a newborn baby. They seemed kind and kept to themselves. We exchanged polite greetings whenever we saw each other, but we never brought up the previous owners. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The other families who had been afraid to speak before started waving again. A few even stopped by to thank us for standing up when no one else would. One neighbor told me quietly that Jeremy had been a problem for years, but people were too scared to do anything about it. They said our family had given the whole street courage. One quiet Sunday afternoon, the three of us sat in the backyard. Willow was drawing on the patio with colored chalk. Alyssa leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "We made it through Mason. We really did." I nodded and kissed the top of her head. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for my wife and daughter. They had stayed strong even when things were darkest. I no longer carried the heavy anger I once felt toward Jeremy and Linda. I had chosen to let it go, not for them, but for myself and my family. Holding on to resentment would only keep me trapped in the past. I wanted to be present for the people who truly mattered. As the sun began to set, Willow looked up from her drawing and asked, "Daddy, are we safe now?" I smiled and answered without hesitation, "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe." That night after Willow went to bed, Alyssa and I sat on the porch with a glass of wine. We talked about the future, small dreams like planning a family vacation, fixing up the backyard, and maybe one day expanding our family. The conversation felt light and hopeful, something we hadn't experienced in a long time. Looking back, I realized the hardest part wasn't the harassment or even losing Milo. The hardest part was learning that some people will never change, no matter how much you hope they will, and that sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to stop trying to fix what cannot be fixed. We had done exactly that. We had chosen our family's safety and happiness over endless conflict. And for the first time in a very long time, we were truly at peace. 6 months have passed since Jeremy and Linda left the neighborhood. The house next door is now home to a young couple with a baby. They wave when they see us and keep their yard neat and quiet. The street feels completely different, calm, ordinary, safe. No more banging on roofs at night. No more rocks flying over the fence. No more fear when Willow plays outside. Our daily life has settled into a gentle rhythm I once thought we had lost forever. In the mornings, I make coffee while Alyssa gets Willow ready for school. Our daughter laughs more freely now. She rides her bike up and down the block without looking over her shoulder. Sometimes she still talks about Milo, but the sadness in her voice has softened into sweet memories. We tell her stories about how brave and loving he was, and she smiles. Alyssa and I have grown closer through everything we endured. We talk more openly about our feelings. We make time for each other, simple date nights at home after Willow goes to bed, weekend walks around the neighborhood, and quiet conversations about the future. The constant tension that once filled our home has been replaced by warmth and gratitude. I no longer wake up checking security cameras. I no longer feel that knot of anxiety in my stomach when I hear a noise outside. The heavy weight I carried for so many months, the anger, the helplessness, the fear for my family has finally lifted. I feel lighter, clearer, more present. Looking back, I realized the most valuable lesson I learned is this: sometimes the strongest thing you can do for your family is to stop tolerating what harms them. We tried being patient, we tried being polite, we tried reasoning with people who had no interest in changing. In the end, the only real solution was to stand up, gather undeniable proof, and let the consequences fall where they belonged. Jeremy is serving his sentence. Linda had to start over in a smaller place far from here. They both paid a real price for their actions, not just legally, but in reputation, relationships, and peace of mind. Their story became a quiet warning in the neighborhood. Some behaviors have serious consequences. As for us, we chose to move forward instead of holding on to bitterness. We didn't let what happened define our new life in Las Vegas. We planted new flowers in the backyard. We fixed the broken windows and painted the walls fresh colors. We made our house feel like a real home again, a place of safety, laughter, and love. Willow recently asked if we could get another dog someday. Alyssa and I smiled at each other. We told her yes when the time feels right. Not to replace Milo, but to welcome new joy into our family. For now, we're enjoying the quiet moments, the sound of Willow's laughter in the yard, the smell of dinner cooking while music plays softly, the simple comfort of knowing we are safe and together. I used to think moving to a new place would automatically bring peace. Now I understand that real peace sometimes has to be fought for. It requires courage to document the truth when no one else will. It requires strength to protect your family when others try to tear it down. And it requires wisdom to let go once justice has been served. We fought for our peace. We protected our daughter. We honored the memory of our loyal dog. And in doing so, we became stronger as a family. Tonight, as the sun sets over our quiet suburban street, I sit on the back porch with Alyssa. Willow is inside drawing pictures. The air is warm and still. There is no fear, only gratitude. We made it through the storm. And on the other side, we found something even better than the fresh start we had hoped for. We found real, lasting peace.
Thank you for listening. Let's move on to the next story in the Revenger Stories series.
My name is Logan Vaughn, and I'm 32 years old. My wife and I had been married for 5 years. We had built what I thought was a strong, happy family, a beautiful home in a peaceful suburban area, a bright 7-year-old daughter, and a life that felt stable and full of promise. But everything changed when my sister-in-law entered the picture. She was my wife's younger sister, recently divorced and struggling with her own problems. At first I tried to be understanding, but soon her jealousy became obvious. She started spreading rumors, twisting small things into big accusations, and claiming I was being unfaithful with someone else. She was so convincing that even my own wife began to doubt me. The accusations spread through the family like wildfire. Suddenly, the people I trusted most were looking at me with suspicion and disappointment. I could have defended myself immediately. I could have argued and fought back in anger. But I chose to stay quiet. I endured the stares, the whispers, and the growing distance from my own wife. While she and the rest of the family turned against me, I started gathering every piece of evidence I could find: messages, timestamps, conversations, and proof that would eventually show the truth. I knew the day would come when I could no longer stay silent. Not in a shouting match, but in the one place where lies would be exposed and the truth would have to be faced. If you like intense family drama stories where one person is falsely accused and quietly fights back with undeniable proof, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I finally revealed everything in front of the entire family. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been wrongly accused by someone close to you? I read every single one. The first cracks appeared quietly, but they spread faster than I could have imagined. It started with small comments during family gatherings. Peyton, my wife's younger sister, had been staying with us more often since her divorce. She was 28, recently single, and struggling with gambling debts she tried to hide. At first I thought her frequent visits were just her needing support from her sister, but soon I noticed how her eyes lingered on Skylar and me whenever we showed affection. She would smile, but the smile never reached her eyes. One Sunday afternoon, while we were all in the backyard, Peyton casually mentioned to Skylar that she had seen me talking with a female colleague at the park near my office. It looked pretty cozy, she said, with a light laugh, as if it was just harmless gossip. Skylar glanced at me but didn't say anything at the time. I brushed it off and continued grilling burgers, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few days, the comments became more frequent and pointed. Peyton started texting Skylar screenshots of random women's social media profiles, claiming they were people Logan has been seen with. She would call late at night when I was still at work and tell Skylar stories about how men like Logan always stray after a few years of marriage. Skylar began asking me questions about my schedule, about who I had lunch with, about why I was home late. Her tone was gentle at first, but the doubt was clear. I tried to reassure her. I told her Peyton was just going through a hard time and that her words were coming from her own pain. Skylar nodded, but I could see the uncertainty growing in her eyes. Peyton kept pushing. She started showing up unannounced, bringing proof in the form of blurry photos or messages she claimed came from anonymous sources. She told Skylar that I had been seen leaving a hotel with another woman. None of it was true, but the constant repetition was wearing my wife down. The atmosphere in the house changed. Skylar became distant. She stopped initiating conversations about our day. Clara, our 7-year-old daughter, noticed the tension and started asking why Mommy and Daddy weren't talking as much. I tried to keep things normal for her, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, but the shadow of Peyton's accusations hung over everything. I knew I couldn't confront Peyton directly yet. She was Skylar's sister, and any argument would only make me look guilty in my wife's eyes, so I stayed calm on the surface. Inside, I began to document everything. I saved every text Peyton sent to Skylar. I took screenshots of the fake evidence she showed. I started recording our conversations whenever Peyton was in the house. I wasn't sure what I would do with the recordings yet, but I knew I needed proof that this was a deliberate campaign, not just innocent family gossip. One evening after Peyton had left, Skylar sat me down at the kitchen table. Her voice was quiet but shaking. Quiet. Logan, I don't want to believe it, but Peyton keeps showing me things. She says you've been lying to me for months. I looked at her and saw the pain in her eyes. I told her I had never been unfaithful, that I loved her and our daughter more than anything. She nodded, but the doubt didn't leave her face. That night after Skylar and Clara went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop and started a private folder. I labeled it clearly and began organizing every piece of evidence against Peyton's claims. I knew this was only the beginning. Peyton wasn't going to stop. She had tasted the power of turning my own family against me, and she was enjoying it. I refused to let her win. I would stay silent for now, endure the suspicion, and build a case so strong that when the truth finally came out, no one could deny it. The next morning, Peyton arrived again, smiling like nothing was wrong. She hugged Skylar and gave Clara a gift. Then she looked at me with that same cold smile and said, "Morning, Logan. Sleep well?" I smiled back politely, but inside I was already planning my next step. The next morning, Peyton arrived again as if nothing had happened. She walked into the kitchen carrying a tray of fresh muffins she had baked, smiling brightly at Skylar and Clara. She hugged my wife like they were the closest sisters in the world and handed Clara a small gift bag with a new coloring book. Then she turned to me with that same cold, knowing smile and said, "Good morning, Logan. You look tired. Rough night." I kept my expression neutral and nodded politely. Inside, I was already recording the conversation on my phone, which I had placed on the counter with the voice memo app running. Peyton didn't notice. She never did. Over breakfast, she started dropping her usual comments. This time they were sharper. She casually mentioned seeing me at a coffee shop last week with a woman she didn't recognize. "She was laughing at everything you said," Peyton said, looking straight at Skylar. "It looked pretty intimate." Skylar's fork paused midair. She glanced at me, her eyes searching for an explanation. I calmly said I had met a female client for a quick work discussion. Peyton immediately laughed and replied, "Oh, is that what they call it these days?" She pulled out her phone and showed Skylar a blurry photo she claimed was taken that day. The image was clearly edited or taken from somewhere else, but it looked convincing enough to plant more doubt. Skylar didn't say anything in front of Peyton, but after she left, the questions started. "Who was that woman in the photo? Why didn't you tell me you had a meeting? Peyton says you've been acting strange for weeks." Her voice was quiet, but the suspicion was growing. I could see the trust we had built over 5 years cracking under the weight of Peyton's lies. The following days were even worse. Peyton began sending Skylar screenshots of fake text messages she claimed came from my phone. They were cleverly made to look real messages, suggesting I was planning secret meetups. She also created group chats with our in-laws and forwarded the same evidence. Soon my mother-in-law was calling Skylar, asking if everything was okay, and hinting that I might be hiding something. The entire family started turning against me. My father-in-law sent me a cold message asking me to be honest with my daughter. Even Clara noticed the change. She asked me one evening why Mommy was always on the phone with Aunt Peyton and why she looked sad. I hugged her and told her everything was fine, but the lie tasted bitter. I continued my silent work. Every night after Skylar and Clara went to bed, I added new files to my evidence folder. I saved every screenshot Peyton sent, every edited photo, every voice message she left for Skylar. I started recording our family dinners when Peyton was present. I also began noting the exact time she visited and what she said in front of my wife and daughter. Peyton grew bolder. She started coming over almost every day, bringing gifts for Clara while whispering more accusations to Skylar in the kitchen. She told my wife that I had been seen leaving a hotel with another woman and that I was using our joint account for secret dates. None of it was true, but the constant repetition was working. Skylar stopped asking me questions directly. She just grew quieter and more distant. One afternoon while I was at work, Peyton took Clara to the park. When they returned, Clara was quiet and wouldn't look at me. Later that night, Skylar told me Peyton had shown our daughter pictures of Daddy with another lady. The thought of my 7-year-old daughter being dragged into this made my blood boil, but I kept my composure. I simply added the incident to my log and continued collecting proof. I knew I couldn't confront Peyton yet. Any argument would only make me look guilty. So I endured the cold stares from my wife, the worried calls from my in-laws, and the confusion in my daughter's eyes. Every single day I reminded myself that patience and evidence were my only weapons. The folder on my laptop was growing thicker. I had timestamps, recordings, screenshots, and even bank statements showing that the secret spending Peyton accused me of was actually money I had spent on surprise gifts for Skylar and Clara. The truth was there, piece by piece, waiting for the right moment. I just needed one more solid piece of evidence before I could reveal everything, and I knew it was coming soon. The folder on my laptop was growing thicker. I had timestamps, recordings, screenshots, and even bank statements showing that the secret spending Peyton accused me of was actually money I had spent on surprise gifts for Skylar and Clara. The truth was there, piece by piece, waiting for the right moment. I just needed one more solid piece of evidence before I could reveal everything, and I knew it was coming soon. 2 days later, Peyton made her biggest mistake. She came over in the afternoon while I was still at work. Skylar told me later that Peyton had brought printed screenshots and claimed they were messages from my phone showing I was planning to meet another woman that same evening. She even suggested they follow me to catch me in the act. Skylar, exhausted from days of doubt, almost agreed, but something made her hesitate. Instead, she told Peyton she needed time to think. That night when I got home, Skylar was quiet. She didn't ask me any questions, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. After Clara went to bed, she finally spoke. Peyton showed me more messages today. She says you're meeting someone tonight. Her voice cracked. I don't know what to believe anymore. I looked at her for a long moment, then asked her to show me the screenshots. When she handed me her phone, I immediately recognized the messages were fake. The phone number was slightly different, the timestamps didn't match my actual schedule, and the language didn't sound like me at all. I saved the images to my evidence folder right in front of her without saying a word. Instead of arguing, I simply said, I'm not meeting anyone. I never have. But I think it's time we had a family meeting, just us, your parents, and Peyton. No more whispers, no more accusations behind my back. Skylar stared at me, surprised by my calm tone. She agreed, though I could tell she was nervous about what might happen. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I organized every piece of evidence into a clear timeline. The first false rumors Peyton spread, the edited photos, the fake messages, the recordings of her boasting to Skylar, and the bank records proving I had never spent money on secret meetings. I also recorded a short video of myself explaining the timeline in a calm, factual way. The family meeting was set for Saturday evening at our house. Skylar's parents arrived first, looking concerned. Peyton came last, wearing a confident smile as if she was walking into a victory lap. We all sat around the dining table. Clara was at a friend's house for a sleepover, so she wouldn't have to witness the confrontation. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, I stood up and spoke. I've stayed quiet long enough, I said. Peyton has been accusing me of cheating for weeks. She's shown you messages, photos, and stories. Tonight I'm going to show you the truth. I connected my laptop to the TV and began presenting the evidence one by one. First, the timeline of when Peyton started spreading the rumors, then the screenshots she had shown Skylar side by side with the original messages I had recovered, clearly showing they had been edited. Next, the recordings where Peyton admitted she was making things up to help her sister see the truth. Finally, the bank statements and my work calendar proving I had never been where she claimed I was. The room was dead silent. Peyton's face went from confident to pale. She tried to interrupt, saying the recordings were fake, but Skylar's father raised his hand and told her to let me finish. When I played the final recording, Peyton laughing on the phone with someone saying, I've almost got Skylar believing Logan is cheating, the color drained from her face completely. Skylar stared at her sister in disbelief. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. Peyton tried to defend herself, claiming she was only trying to protect Skylar from a bad husband. But her words sounded weak now. The evidence was overwhelming. Skylar's parents were shocked. Her mother looked at Peyton with disappointment and said, "We raised you better than this." The meeting ended with Peyton storming out, refusing to admit anything. But the damage was done. The truth had finally been shown in the open. That night, after everyone left, Skylar sat beside me on the couch, tears in her eyes. She apologized for doubting me and for letting her sister's words affect her so deeply. I told her I understood how manipulative Peyton had been, but that we needed to set clear boundaries from now on. For the first time in weeks, we talked honestly. She admitted she had been scared of losing our marriage and had let fear cloud her judgment. I told her I had never stopped loving her and that I had only stayed silent to protect our family from more damage. We both agreed that Peyton could no longer be part of our daily lives. The trust had been broken too deeply. The next morning, Skylar called her parents and told them she was cutting contact with Peyton until she took full responsibility for what she had done. They supported the decision. Peyton tried to reach out several times over the following days, sending messages claiming she was just trying to help. We didn't respond. The storm was far from over, but for the first time I felt we were finally on the same side again. The storm was far from over, but for the first time I felt we were finally on the same side again. The days after the family meeting were tense, but different. Skylar no longer looked at me with suspicion. Instead, she looked at me with regret and quiet determination. We spent long evenings really talking about how Peyton had managed to drive such a deep wedge between us. She admitted she had been scared of repeating her sister's failed marriage and had let that fear make her blind to the truth. Peyton, however, did not stay silent. She called Skylar repeatedly, leaving long voicemails claiming she had only been trying to protect her little sister. She sent messages to the family group chat saying I had manipulated the evidence and that I was the real problem. She even tried to contact my parents, telling them I was hiding things from everyone, but the tide had turned. Skylar's parents had seen the recordings and screenshots with their own eyes. They told Peyton they needed space and asked her not to contact them for a while. I continued gathering more evidence, not because I needed it for the meeting, but because I knew Peyton might try something else. I saved every voicemail, every text, every attempt she made to twist the story. My private folder was now extremely detailed, a complete record of her campaign against me. One evening, Skylar sat down with me after Clara had gone to bed. She took my hands and said, "I'm so sorry, Logan. I let her get inside my head. I should have trusted you." Her voice broke. I told her I understood how convincing Peyton could be, especially since she was family. We both agreed that we needed to protect our marriage and our daughter from any more poison. We decided to set clear boundaries. Skylar blocked Peyton on her phone and social media. She also sent a calm but firm message to the family group saying that any further attempts by Peyton to spread rumors would be met with no response and possible legal action. The message was short, factual, and left no room for debate. Peyton's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She posted on her own social media about how her toxic brother-in-law was turning her family against her. She painted herself as the victim once again. But this time, fewer people believed her. Some mutual friends who had seen the evidence started distancing themselves from her. The real turning point came 2 weeks later. Skylar's parents called for another family meeting, this time without Peyton. They told us they had reviewed everything and were deeply disappointed in their younger daughter. They had decided to change their will and trust documents. Peyton would no longer receive the large inheritance she had been counting on. Instead, a significant portion would be placed in a trust for Clara's education and future. When Peyton found out, she was furious. She showed up at our house unannounced, shouting that I had brainwashed everyone. Skylar stood beside me and told her sister calmly but firmly that the lies had to stop. Peyton tried to cry and play the victim again, but this time, it didn't work. Skylar simply said, "You crossed the line when you tried to destroy my marriage and hurt my daughter. I can't have you in our lives anymore." Peyton left in tears, but there was no reconciliation. In the following month, the consequences for Peyton became very real. She lost the financial support she had expected from her parents. Many family members stopped inviting her to gatherings. Her gambling problems, which she had hidden for years, started to surface more openly. She tried to reach out to Skylar one last time, begging for forgiveness, but Skylar told her the trust was broken and she needed to focus on her own family now. For us, life slowly returned to normal, but better. Skylar and I started going on weekly date nights again. We talked more openly about our fears and dreams. Clara seemed happier, sensing the peace in the house. She even asked if we could get a new dog someday. We told her we would think about it when the time felt right. I no longer felt the need to check my evidence folder every night. The truth had been shown, and the family had chosen to stand with us. Peyton had tried to tear our family apart out of jealousy and resentment. Instead, her actions forced us to become stronger and more united than before. We had survived the storm, and on the other side, we found something even more valuable, a marriage built on trust that had been tested and proven. We had survived the storm. And on the other side, we found something even more valuable, a marriage built on trust that had been tested and proven. The weeks after Peyton was cut off from the family felt like waking up from a long nightmare. The house became peaceful again. Mornings were no longer filled with tension or suspicious glances. Skylar and I started talking like we used to about our day, about Clara's school, about small dreams for the future. The constant shadow of doubt that Peyton had cast over us slowly lifted. Clara noticed the change immediately. She laughed more freely, asked fewer worried questions, and even started singing while doing her homework. One evening, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Daddy, you're not mad at Mommy anymore, right?" I told her we had worked through a difficult time and that we were stronger now. She smiled and went back to her drawing content. Skylar and I made a conscious effort to rebuild what had been damaged. We scheduled regular date nights, even if it was just dinner at home after Clara went to bed. We talked openly about how Peyton had manipulated the situation and how we both had let fear affect our judgment. Skylar apologized again for doubting me, and I told her I understood how convincing her sister had been. We agreed that from now on, we would communicate directly with each other instead of letting third parties plant seeds of doubt. Peyton did not disappear quietly. She tried several times to reach out. She sent long messages to Skylar claiming she had only been trying to protect her and that I had turned the entire family against her. She even called Skylar's parents crying and playing the victim card, but this time no one was swayed. Skylar's mother told her firmly that the lies and manipulation had gone too far and that she needed to take responsibility for her actions. Peyton's gambling problems, which had been hidden for years, also started coming to light within the family. She had borrowed money from relatives under false pretenses and never repaid it. The consequences were catching up with her. 1 month after the family meeting, Skylar's parents made their decision official. They changed their will and trust documents. Peyton would receive only a small fixed amount, far less than she had expected. The majority of the inheritance was placed in a trust for Clara's education and future needs. When Peyton learned about this, she had a complete meltdown. She showed up at our house unannounced, screaming that I had stolen her future and turned everyone against her. Skylar stood beside me and told her sister calmly but firmly that the damage she had caused was her own doing. Peyton left in tears, but there was no reconciliation. For the first time in months, our home felt safe and warm again. I no longer had to document every conversation or worry about new accusations. I could focus on my job, on being a good husband, and on being present for Clara. The promotion I received at work gave us some financial breathing room, and we even started planning a small family vacation for the summer. Skylar and I grew closer through the experience. We learned to spot manipulation faster and to communicate more honestly. We also learned the importance of protecting our marriage from toxic influences, even when they came from family. Peyton's life continued to unravel. She lost most of her remaining family support and had to move to a smaller apartment farther away. Her attempts to restart her social life were met with skepticism from people who had heard what happened. She tried one last time to contact Skylar, sending a long message asking for forgiveness and claiming she was getting help for her gambling addiction. Skylar read it but chose not to reply. The trust had been broken too deeply. As the months passed, I realized I no longer felt anger toward Peyton. I felt pity for the choices she had made and gratitude that we had protected our family from her toxicity. One quiet evening, as Skylar and I sat on the back porch watching Clara play in the yard, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "I'm so glad we made it through this." I kissed the top of her head and replied, "Me too, and I'm never letting anyone come between us again." We had survived the worst kind of betrayal, one that came from inside the family. We had chosen truth over lies, unity over division, and love over manipulation, and in doing so, we had become stronger than before. We had survived the worst kind of betrayal, one that came from inside the family. We had chosen truth over lies, unity over division, and love over manipulation, and in doing so, we had become stronger than before. 3 months had passed since the final family meeting where everything was exposed. The silence from Peyton's side was almost complete. She had stopped calling and messaging Skylar. The last attempt had been a long, emotional voicemail claiming she was getting help for her gambling issues and begging for forgiveness. Skylar listened to it once, then deleted it without replying. The trust had been broken too deeply, and neither of us saw any reason to reopen that door. Our daily life had settled into a calm, steady rhythm I had almost forgotten was possible. Mornings started with breakfast together, Skylar making coffee while I helped Clara get ready for school. Evenings were spent reading stories, talking about our day, and simply enjoying each other's company without the constant shadow of suspicion. Clara seemed lighter, laughing more freely and no longer asking why Mommy and Daddy were quiet or why Aunt Peyton wasn't coming over anymore. Skylar and I made a conscious effort to rebuild the intimacy that had been damaged. We scheduled regular date nights, even if it was just cooking dinner together after Clara went to bed. We talked openly about how Peyton had manipulated the situation and how fear had clouded Skylar's judgment. She apologized again for doubting me, and I reassured her that I understood how convincing her sister had been, especially since they shared a long history. We both agreed that from now on we would communicate directly with each other instead of letting third parties plant seeds of doubt. At work, things were also improving. The promotion I received gave us some financial breathing room after the difficult period. My colleagues no longer looked at me with suspicion. A few who had heard rumors through the grapevine even apologized quietly, saying they should have known better than to believe gossip without facts. One weekend, Skylar's parents came over for dinner. The conversation naturally turned to Peyton. Her mother looked tired as she told us that Peyton had moved to a smaller apartment in another part of the state and was struggling financially. She had asked her parents for money several times, but they had refused, telling her she needed to take responsibility for her actions. They had also made their decision about the will. Official Peyton would receive only a small fixed amount, while a significant portion was placed in a trust for Clara's future education and needs. When Peyton learned about the change in the will, she had another outburst. She called her parents crying, accusing them of choosing me over their own daughter. Her father had replied calmly that they were choosing truth and fairness over manipulation and lies. That was the last time they spoke. As the months continued, the consequences for Peyton became very real and lasting. She lost most of her remaining family support. Many relatives stopped inviting her to gatherings. Her gambling problems, which she had hidden for years, started to surface more openly within the family circle. She tried to restart some kind of online presence, but the reputation from what happened followed her. Brands and followers were wary. She eventually went silent on social media and lived a very private, low-profile life. For us, the healing continued in small but meaningful ways. Skylar and I started planning a family vacation for the summer, something simple, just the three of us. Clara was excited and kept asking where we would go. We hadn't decided yet, but the simple act of planning together felt like proof that we had moved past the darkness. One quiet evening, as Skylar and I sat on the back porch watching the sunset, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "I'm so grateful we made it through this, Logan. I almost lost you because I let fear control me." I kissed the top of her head and replied, "We both almost lost what we had, but we chose each other in the end. That's what matters." We had learned a hard but valuable lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous threats to a marriage come from inside the family. Jealousy, manipulation, and lies can be far more damaging than any outside force. The only way to protect what you have is to face the truth together and set firm boundaries even when it hurts. Peyton had tried to tear our family apart out of her own pain and resentment. Instead, her actions forced us to confront our weaknesses, strengthen our bond, and become more united than we had been before. As I looked at my wife and thought about our daughter sleeping peacefully inside, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The storm had passed, the damage had been repaired, and on the other side we had found something even stronger, a marriage built on honesty, trust, and the choice to fight for each other. We were finally at peace. We were finally at peace. 1 year had passed since the day I exposed Peyton's lies in front of the entire family. The backyard where I once stood with a heavy heart was now filled with laughter. Clara, now 8 years old, was running around with her new puppy, a gentle golden retriever we adopted 6 months ago. She named him Sonny, and he had quickly become a beloved member of our family. Skylar and I watched from the porch as our daughter played her giggles, mixing with the warm Kansas City evening breeze. The tension that once filled this home had been replaced by something lighter, stronger, and more genuine. Our marriage was not just repaired, it was better than before. Skylar and I had learned to communicate more openly and honestly. We no longer allowed outside voices to plant seeds of doubt. We made time for each other every week, whether it was a quiet dinner at home or a weekend walk in the park. The experience with Peyton had taught us both how fragile trust could be and how important it was to protect it fiercely. At work, my career had stabilized and grown. The promotion I received had led to more responsibilities and better financial security. I no longer carried the weight of false accusations or worried about my reputation being destroyed overnight. My colleagues respected me, and I approached each day with a clear mind and renewed energy. Peyton's life had taken a very different path. After being cut off from the family, she moved to a smaller city in another state. Her attempts to restart any kind of social presence quietly faded. The gambling issues she had hidden for years became more apparent, and she struggled financially without the support she once expected from her parents. From what we heard through distant relatives, she lived a very private, low-profile life, rarely reaching out to anyone. She never apologized. She never took full responsibility. She simply disappeared from our world. We never contacted her again. There were no messages, no calls, no attempts at reconciliation. The door had been closed completely, and we had no intention of reopening it. The pain she caused, the false accusations, the manipulation, the near destruction of our marriage was too deep to forgive without real change. And real change never came. One quiet evening, as Skylar and I sat on the back porch watching Clara play with Sonny, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said softly, "I still can't believe how close we came to losing everything." I kissed the top of her head and replied, "We didn't lose it. We fought for it, and we're stronger because of it." That was the truth. The hardest lesson we learned was that sometimes the most dangerous threats to a family come from within, from jealousy, resentment, and lies disguised as concern. Peyton had tried to tear us apart because she couldn't stand seeing her sister happy while her own life was falling apart. Instead of dealing with her own problems, she tried to destroy ours. We chose a different path. We chose truth. We chose each other. We chose to protect our daughter from toxicity, even when it meant cutting off someone who shared blood with my wife. Looking back, I am grateful for the strength we found in that difficult time. I am grateful that I stayed calm and gathered evidence instead of reacting in anger. I am grateful that Skylar eventually saw the truth and stood beside me. And I am grateful that we emerged from the storm not broken, but stronger, wiser, and more united. The biggest lesson I want to share is this: when someone tries to destroy your peace with lies and manipulation, don't fight fire with fire. Stay calm. Gather the truth. Present it clearly and patiently. Justice doesn't always come fast, but when it does, it comes completely. Protect your family, protect your marriage, and never be afraid to set firm boundaries, even with people you once loved. As the sun set over our quiet suburban neighborhood, I looked at my wife and daughter and felt a deep sense of peace I hadn't known in years. We had survived, we had healed, and we were finally living the life we had always wanted together, safe and truly happy.
Thank you for listening. Let's move on to the next story in the Revenger Stories series.
My name is Mason Donovan, and I'm 32 years old. For 3 years, my girlfriend and I built what looked like a perfect relationship. We talked about marriage, about building a future together, about the life we wanted to share. In the beginning, she was caring, hardworking, and full of energy. But slowly, everything changed. She became lazy, stopped taking care of herself or the home, and relied completely on me for everything. She no longer worked, no longer helped with daily responsibilities, and expected me to handle it all while she did nothing. I tried my best to talk to her gently, to encourage her to change, to support her in becoming better. I believed if I was patient and understanding, things would improve. But no matter how hard I tried, nothing changed. It felt like her true nature had finally revealed itself, and it was getting harder and harder to ignore. So I stopped hoping for change. Instead, I started recording every conversation, every demand, every time she blamed me for her own inaction. I gathered months of proof, waiting for the moment when I could no longer stay silent. Because deep down, I knew one day the truth would have to come out. And when it did, she would finally see the reality she had been avoiding. If you like raw, honest stories about relationships where one person gives everything while the other takes advantage, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happened when I finally showed her all the recordings. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever stayed in a relationship longer than you should have? I read every single one. 2 weeks earlier, I finally reached my breaking point. I was sitting at the kitchen table after a long day at work, staring at the pile of unpaid bills and the messy living room that Peyton had left untouched again. She was lying on the couch, scrolling through her phone, the same position she had been in when I left for work that morning. The TV was blaring in the background, and the dishes from breakfast were still sitting in the sink. This had become our normal routine, and I was exhausted from carrying it all alone. Peyton looked up from her phone and said casually, "Babe, can you order dinner tonight? I'm too tired to cook." She didn't even look at me when she said it. It was the same line I had heard almost every evening for the past several months. I felt the familiar frustration rising in my chest, but I kept my voice steady and asked her why she hadn't done anything around the house all day. She sighed loudly and replied, "I just don't feel motivated lately. You know how stressed I've been. You're the one who makes more money anyway, so it's easier if you handle it." That sentence hit me harder than usual. It wasn't the first time she had said something like that, but tonight it felt different. I realized I had been making excuses for her behavior for too long. In the beginning of our relationship, she was energetic, helpful, and full of plans for our future. Now she barely left the couch, expected me to pay for everything, and got defensive whenever I tried to talk about it. I had tried being patient. I had tried encouraging her gently. I had even suggested we go to counseling together. Nothing worked. After dinner, which I ended up ordering and paying for again, I went to the bedroom to think. I knew I couldn't keep living like this if we were really going to get married. I needed proof that I wasn't exaggerating or being unfair. That was when I decided to start recording our conversations. Not to trap her, but to have something concrete to show her later when she inevitably denied everything. The next morning, I tested the voice recorder app on my phone to make sure it worked quietly. I told myself this was just temporary, just until I had enough evidence to have a real conversation with her. But deep down, I already knew this was the beginning of the end. Over the following days, I kept the recorder running whenever Peyton and I were together at home. I captured every complaint, every demand for money, every time she blamed me for her lack of motivation, and every excuse she gave for not helping around the house. I also recorded the moments when she was sweet and loving in front of other people, the way she would suddenly become the perfect girlfriend when my friends or family were around. I still acted normal around her. I still made her coffee in the morning, still asked about her day, still tried to be the supportive partner I had always been. But inside, I was documenting everything. Each recording felt like another piece of a puzzle I didn't want to complete, but I knew I had to. By the end of that week, I had hours of conversations saved. I listened to them late at night when Peyton was asleep, and the pattern was undeniable. She had stopped trying. She had stopped caring. And worst of all, she had started to believe that it was my responsibility to fix everything while she contributed nothing. I knew the conversation I was about to have with her would change everything. I just didn't know yet how much it would hurt. That Saturday morning, I arrived at the original venue with a heavy heart. I had flown nearly 8,000 kilometers from Atlanta to Philadelphia with the hope that this trip would be a fresh start for us. Peyton and I had been talking about marriage for months, and this wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love and family. I had imagined walking into the historic garden venue, seeing the beautiful decorations, and feeling excited about our own future wedding. Instead, when the Uber dropped me off at the address Mason had sent me weeks earlier, the place was completely empty. There were no cars in the parking lot, no white folding chairs arranged neatly on the lawn, no floral arch, no string lights, no sign of any wedding setup at all. The garden looked peaceful but abandoned, as if no event had been planned there for weeks. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty space, trying to convince myself that I must have the wrong address. I checked the invitation on my phone again. The address was exactly the one Mason had sent. I even double-checked the date and time. Everything matched. Ruby wasn't with me on this trip, but I could almost hear her voice asking why there was no one there. The silence around me felt louder than any noise. I opened the family group chat. The last messages from Mason confirming the venue were still there, but when I scrolled up, I noticed several recent messages had been deleted. That was when the first real wave of unease hit me. Something was very wrong. I opened Instagram and searched for recent posts from my family. That was when I saw the truth. There were multiple photos posted just hours earlier from a completely different location, a luxurious indoor ballroom with crystal chandeliers, elegant floral arrangements, and a large dance floor. Mason and Peyton were smiling in every picture, surrounded by the rest of the family. The caption on one post read, "Perfect day with our closest family." No mention of me, no invitation for me to join them. It was as if I had been erased from the day entirely. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through more photos. The new venue was clearly visible, a high-end place far from the historic garden I was standing in. They had changed the location without telling me. They had deliberately made sure I would show up at the wrong place after flying thousands of kilometers across the country. I tried calling Mason. The call went straight to voicemail. I called Peyton, same result. I called my parents. The call rang for a long time before going to voicemail. I left a short message asking what was going on, but I already knew deep down that they wouldn't reply. One by one, I tried every family member whose number I had. Some calls went straight to voicemail, others showed as blocked. The pattern was unmistakable. They had coordinated this. They had changed the venue, made sure I flew all this way, and then cut me off so I wouldn't be able to reach them once I arrived at the wrong place. The realization settled in deeper with every failed call. This wasn't a simple mistake or a last-minute change. This was intentional exclusion. They didn't want me at my own brother's wedding, and they had gone to great lengths to make sure I would feel every bit of the rejection. I stood there in the empty garden, phone in hand, while the weight of the situation pressed down on me. The trip I had taken across nearly 8,000 kilometers had led me to nothing but silence and deliberate rejection. The photos on my phone showed the real celebration happening somewhere else, with the rest of the family smiling as if I had never been part of their plans at all. I took a deep breath and started walking back toward the main road to call an Uber. The anger was starting to mix with sadness. I had come here with hope, with the belief that family still meant something. Instead, I was left standing alone in an empty garden, realizing that my own family had chosen to exclude me on purpose. As I waited for the car, I opened the group chat one more time. Another photo had just been posted, Mason and Peyton cutting the cake at the new venue. The caption read, "Best day of our lives." I closed the app and put my phone away. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, trying to process everything. I knew I couldn't just go back home without understanding why they had done this. There had to be a reason, and I was determined to find out what it was. That afternoon, I made a decision. I would go see my grandfather, Arthur. He had always been the one person in the family who saw me clearly. If anyone could help me understand what was really happening, it was him. I stood there in the empty garden for a moment longer, trying to process what I was seeing. The silence around the historic garden venue felt heavier than before. Ruby wasn't with me on this trip, but I could almost hear her voice asking why there was no one there. I refreshed the invitation on my phone again, but the address was still the same one Mason had sent me weeks earlier. Everything pointed to this location, yet there was nothing here, no decorations, no guests, no sign that a wedding was supposed to take place today. The realization was starting to settle in, cold and sharp. I opened the family group chat and scrolled through the messages. The last few entries from Mason had been deleted. That was when I noticed a new notification. Someone had accidentally left a photo in the chat, a picture of Mason and Peyton, smiling in front of a completely different ballroom surrounded by elegant decorations and the rest of the family. The caption read, "Perfect day with our closest family." The new venue was clearly visible in the background, a luxurious indoor space far from where I was standing. My stomach dropped. They had changed the venue without telling me. They had done it on purpose, and they had made sure I wouldn't know until it was too late. I checked Instagram next and found more posts from the new location, all posted just hours earlier. Family members were tagging each other, laughing in photos, acting as if everything was normal. No mention of me. No invitation for me to join them. It was as if I had been erased from the day entirely. I tried calling Mason again, straight to voicemail. I called Peyton. Same result. I called my parents. The call rang for a long time before going to voicemail. I left a short message asking what was going on, but I already knew they wouldn't reply. One by one, I tried every family member whose number I had. Some calls went straight to voicemail. Others showed as blocked. The pattern was unmistakable. They had coordinated this. They had changed the venue, made sure I flew all this way, and then cut me off so I wouldn't be able to reach them once I arrived at the wrong place. The realization settled in deeper with every failed call. This wasn't a simple mistake or a last-minute change. This was intentional exclusion. They didn't want me at my own brother's wedding, and they had gone to great lengths to make sure I would show up at the wrong location like an outsider who didn't belong. I stood up and looked around the empty garden one last time. The trip I had taken across nearly 8,000 kilometers had led me to nothing but silence and intentional rejection. The photos on my phone showed the real celebration happening somewhere else, with the rest of the family smiling as if I had never been part of their plans at all. I took a deep breath and started walking back toward the main road to call an Uber. The anger was starting to mix with sadness. I had come here with hope, with the belief that family still meant something. Instead, I was left standing alone in an empty garden, realizing that my own family had chosen to exclude me on purpose. As I waited for the car, I opened the group chat one more time. Another photo had just been posted, Mason and Peyton cutting the cake at the new venue. The caption read, "Best day of our lives." I closed the app and put my phone away. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. I sat in the back seat staring out the window trying to process everything. I knew I couldn't just go back home without understanding why they had done this. There had to be a reason, and I was determined to find out what it was. That afternoon, I made a decision. I would go see my grandfather Arthur. He had always been the one person in the family who saw me clearly. If anyone could help me understand what was really happening, it was him. I arrived at his quiet home on the outskirts of Philadelphia later that day. When my grandfather opened the door, he looked surprised but not shocked. He invited me inside and asked why I wasn't at the wedding. I told him everything: the wrong venue, the changed location, the blocked calls, the photos of the real celebration. He listened quietly, then nodded slowly. He asked me to sit down and told me there was something I needed to know. He pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the coffee table. Inside was the original will he had made 2 years ago. He explained that he had changed it after seeing how my family had been treating me for years. In the new version, I was named the sole executor of his entire estate. The house, the investments, the savings, everything was to be managed by me. My parents, Mason Peyton, and the rest of the family would receive only small fixed amounts. The bulk of the assets would stay under my control until I decided how to use them. I stared at the documents, reading the clear legal language over and over. My grandfather watched me quietly. He said he had kept this version secret because he knew how greedy some family members had become. He had watched them push me aside for years and decided I was the only one he trusted with his life's work. The room felt very still. I felt the weight of his words and the documents in my hands. My grandfather told me he had already spoken with his lawyer and everything was properly filed. If anything happened to him, the family would discover the truth in the most unexpected way. We stayed together for several hours that afternoon. He spoke calmly about his wishes, his regrets about how the family had turned out, and how proud he was of the man I had become despite the way they treated me. Before I left, he hugged me tightly and told me to protect myself first. As I drove away from his house, the documents felt heavy in my bag. The empty wedding venue, the blocked calls, the secret new location, they all made sense now. My family hadn't just excluded me from the wedding. They had been trying to push me out of the family entirely so they could control everything when my grandfather passed. I took a deep breath and started walking back toward the main road to call an Uber. The empty historic garden venue grew smaller behind me as I moved through the quiet paths. My phone kept buzzing with new notifications from the family group chat, but I already knew what they were. More photos from the real wedding venue, more smiling faces, more proof that I had been deliberately left out. I didn't open them. I didn't need to see anymore. The Uber arrived quickly. As I sat in the back seat, the driver asked if everything was okay. I told him I was fine, but inside my mind was racing. The trip I had taken across nearly 8,000 kilometers had led me to nothing but silence and intentional rejection. The photos on my phone showed the real celebration happening somewhere else, with the rest of the family smiling as if I had never been part of their plans at all. I arrived at my grandfather Arthur's house later that afternoon. When he opened the door, he looked surprised but not shocked to see me. He invited me inside and asked why I wasn't at the wedding. I told him everything: the wrong venue, the changed location, the blocked calls, the photos of the real celebration happening without me. He listened quietly, then nodded slowly as if he had expected something like this. He asked me to sit down and told me there was something I needed to know. He slowly walked over to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the coffee table in front of me and said, "I've been waiting for the right moment to show you this. I guess today is that moment." Inside the folder was the original will he had made 2 years ago. He explained in detail that he had changed it after seeing how my family had been treating me for years. In the new version, I was named the sole executor of his entire estate. The house, the investments, the savings accounts, and several other assets, everything was to be managed by me. My parents, Mason Peyton, and the rest of the family would receive only small fixed amounts. The bulk of the estate would stay under my control until I decided how to use it for my future and my own peace of mind. I stared at the documents, reading the clear legal language over and over. The room felt very still. My grandfather watched me quietly, giving me time to process what I was seeing. He told me he had kept this version secret because he knew how greedy and entitled some members of the family had become. He had watched them push me aside, belittle my efforts, and treat me like I didn't belong, and he had decided long ago that I was the only one he trusted with his life's work. He asked me to promise that I would protect myself first and use the resources wisely. I nodded, still trying to absorb everything. He also told me he had already spoken with his lawyer, Mr. Petraeus, and everything was properly filed and witnessed. If anything happened to him, the family would discover the truth in the most unexpected way. We stayed together for several hours that afternoon. He spoke calmly about his wishes, his regrets about how the family had turned out, and how proud he was of the man I had become despite the way they treated me. Before I left, he hugged me tightly and told me to be strong. As I drove away from his house, the documents felt heavy in my bag. The empty wedding venue, the blocked calls, the secret new location, they all made sense now. My family hadn't just excluded me from the wedding. They had been trying to push me out of the family entirely so they could control everything when my grandfather passed. That evening back at the hotel, I sat on the bed and stared at the folder. The weight of what my grandfather had entrusted to me was starting to sink in. I realized that this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. This was about years of being pushed aside, years of being treated like I was less than years of my own family choosing convenience and greed over me. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I made a decision. I would not confront them yet. I would wait. I would let them enjoy their perfect day while I prepared for what was coming next. The following weeks were quiet on the surface, but inside I was preparing. I spoke with Mr. Petraeus several times to understand my responsibilities as executor. I started organizing my own life, making sure I was ready for whatever came after my grandfather's passing. I knew the storm was coming, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. 42 days later, the lawyer called me. I was at home making breakfast when Mr. Petraeus's number appeared on my phone. His voice was calm and professional as he told me my grandfather, Arthur, had passed away peacefully in his sleep the night before. He asked me to come to his office the next morning to discuss the will and the next steps. The funeral was small and quiet. Only a few close friends and neighbors attended. My parents, Mason Peyton, and the rest of the family were noticeably absent. They had chosen not to come after learning I was handling the arrangements. I stood beside the casket with a heavy heart, realizing that the man who had believed in me when my own family didn't was gone, but he had left me something far more important than money. The next day at the lawyer's office, Mr. Petraeus read the will aloud. The room was silent as he explained that I was named the sole executor. My parents and Mason would each receive a fixed sum enough to be comfortable, but nowhere near what they had expected. The majority of the estate, including the house and investments, would be managed by me for my future and my own peace of mind. My phone started vibrating nonstop as soon as the news spread. Messages from my mother, father, Mason Peyton, and even Aunt Barbara flooded in. They demanded explanations, accused me of manipulating my grandfather, and begged me to do the right thing for the family. I read them all, but didn't reply to a single one. Mason called repeatedly. When I finally answered, his voice was shaking with anger and panic. "You can't do this, Ethan. We're family. You have to share this." I told him the will was clear and legal. He shouted that I was destroying the family, but I stayed calm and ended the call. Peyton sent long messages blaming me for everything, saying I'd always been jealous of their happiness and that I had stolen what was rightfully theirs. My parents tried the guilt approach, reminding me of everything they had done for me growing up. I read every message, but I didn't respond. In the weeks that followed, the attempts to contact me grew more desperate. They hired a lawyer to challenge the will, but Mr. Petraeus assured me it was ironclad. The financial pressure on them increased as they realized they would not get the large inheritance they had counted on. Some of their luxury lifestyle choices started to crumble under the reality of their limited funds. I changed my number after the third week. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. As the days passed, I felt something inside me slowly release. All the years of being looked down on, being treated like I was less than being pushed aside, it was finally over. I no longer had to prove my worth to people who never valued me. I no longer had to carry the weight of their expectations or their contempt. For the first time in a very long time, I felt free. I started focusing on my own life again. I went back to work with a clearer mind. I spent more time doing things I enjoyed. I no longer felt the constant pressure to fix everything for everyone else. The heavy weight I had carried for so long had disappeared. I felt lighter, clearer headed, and more in control of my own days and decisions. Every morning I woke up without that familiar knot in my stomach. Every evening felt peaceful instead of tense. I realized that walking away from that toxic dynamic was the best decision I had ever made for myself. 1 month has passed since my grandfather's funeral. After everything that happened at the wedding and the reading of the will, the silence from my family has been complete. No more calls, no more angry messages, no more attempts to guilt me into sharing what my grandfather left behind. They finally understood that I wasn't going to change my mind. I haven't spoken to Mason or Peyton since that day at the lawyer's office. Mason tried one last time to reach me through a mutual friend saying he was sorry and that we should talk like brothers. I didn't reply. Peyton sent a long message blaming me for everything, saying I had always been jealous of their happiness and that I had stolen what was rightfully theirs. My parents sent one final text asking me to do the right thing for the family, but after I didn't respond, even they stopped. The lawyer told me they tried to challenge the will in court, but the case was dismissed quickly. The document was clear, properly signed and witnessed. There was nothing they could do. They are now dealing with the reality that the large inheritance they had counted on will never come. I heard they had to sell some of their luxury items and downsize their plans. The financial pressure and public embarrassment from the wedding day have taken a heavy toll on them. As for me, I am quietly rebuilding my life here in Atlanta. I focus more on my job, on my own well being, and on things that actually bring me peace. There are no more forced family obligations, no more bills I'm expected to cover alone, and no more feeling like I have to prove my worth to people who never truly respected me. The biggest lesson I learned from all of this is that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. Letting go of years of resentment and refusing to let myself be used anymore has given me a kind of freedom and peace I hadn't felt in a long time. When you stop allowing yourself to be stepped on or taken advantage of, you create real space for self-respect and genuine happiness. I left that part of the family behind without regret, and I have no plans to go back. For the first time in my adult life, I have my own life, one where I am no longer chafed, pressured, or made to feel small by anyone. The heavy weight I carried for so long has disappeared. I feel lighter, clearer headed, and more in control of my own days and decisions. Every morning I wake up without that familiar knot in my stomach. Every evening feels peaceful instead of tense. I no longer wake up wondering if today will be another day of being dismissed or taken for granted. I no longer have to pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. I finally have the space to breathe, to grow, and to focus on what truly matters to me. Looking back, I realized that the pain I went through was necessary. It forced me to see the truth I had been avoiding for years. It taught me that love and loyalty should never be one-sided. It taught me that family is not just about blood, it's about how people treat you. And when that treatment is consistently disrespectful and exploitative, the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. I am finally at peace. We haven't spoken since the funeral, and honestly, I'm perfectly okay with that.
Thank you for listening. Let's move on to the next story in the Revenger Stories series.
My name is Joshua Anderson. For the last 15 years, I've been the oldest son who had to step up after our father passed away too soon. I became the rock for the entire family. I worked long hours as a construction engineer, put my own life on hold, and made sure everyone had what they needed. Eventually, I was the one who bought us a nice warm house right here in Boise so we could finally stop renting and live comfortably together. I never asked for thanks. I just wanted my family to be okay. But on the night of the memorial birthday party we hold every year to remember my late father, everything changed. Right there in the middle of what was supposed to be a respectful gathering, I was publicly betrayed by my own brother. The words I overheard and the things said out loud in front of everyone hit me harder than anything I've ever experienced. My mother tried to speak up for me, but it didn't matter. The selfishness and the entitlement that came out that night revealed truths I never wanted to believe about the people closest to me. I stood there listening, feeling the ground shift under my feet. All those years of sacrifice, all the money I poured in to keep the family stable suddenly felt like they meant nothing. That single evening turned into the moment I realized I had been taken for granted for far too long. And when the full weight of their intentions finally sank in, I made a quiet decision right then and there. This is the story of how one betrayal at my father's memorial birthday party forced me to stop everything, how I finally exposed the truth and took back control of my life. If you've ever been used by your own family or felt like you were the only one carrying everyone else, then you need to hear what happened next. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a single part of this story. The house we finally owned in Boise quickly became the center of our everyday routines. Mornings began with the usual sounds of the kitchen as I prepared for another day at the construction engineering firm. I would review project plans over coffee while the rest of the family gradually woke up. My younger brother Nicholas worked in sales for a regional distribution company, but the commissions varied wildly depending on monthly targets. He often returned home frustrated after long drives to meet clients, sharing stories of deals that fell through at the last minute. His wife Samantha stayed home to look after their son Ethan, managing school schedules and after-school soccer practices with precision. She kept the household running smoothly, from organizing laundry to planning weekly groceries, and she frequently brought up small but necessary purchases during our evening conversations. Those dinners around the large table became the highlight of each day. My mother Susan prepared simple but satisfying meals like roasted vegetables and baked chicken, and we would talk about ordinary things: work deadlines, school projects, and weekend plans. Samantha would mention items that needed attention, such as new school supplies for Ethan or replacement parts for the family car. I listened carefully and transferred funds from my account the same night, seeing it as a way to keep everything stable without creating tension. Nicholas appreciated the help, often nodding in relief when I confirmed the payment had gone through. My sister Kayla, who taught third grade at the elementary school just a few miles away, joined us for many of those meals. She lived in a small apartment nearby and brought lively stories about her students and classroom activities. Kayla had a keen eye for family dynamics and would sometimes pull me aside after dinner to comment on how much Nicholas seemed to count on the extra support. I always told her it was part of being the oldest and that the house had given us all a foundation we never had before. Deep inside, I felt a steady sense of fulfillment knowing my long hours at the firm were creating this kind of security for everyone. Weekends followed their own comfortable pattern. We often drove to one of the nearby parks along the river where Ethan could run freely on the grass while the adults sat on benches discussing light topics. Nicholas would suggest small family outings, and Samantha would add ideas for things that would make the day more enjoyable. I covered the costs for gas, snacks, and entry fees without hesitation, viewing these moments as rewards for the years of sacrifice. Samantha spoke directly to me on several occasions, saying things like, "Nicholas is fortunate to have your backing, though." Her words carried an underlying expectation that the support would continue indefinitely. I accepted it as her way of acknowledging the role I played. As the seasons shifted and summer gave way to cooler autumn air, the family began turning their attention to the annual memorial birthday party we held to remember my late father. Susan took the lead in planning the menu, listing traditional dishes she knew everyone enjoyed. Nicholas offered to handle the invitations for our extended relatives, while Samantha focused on decorations and ensuring the living room and backyard looked presentable. Kayla volunteered to bake the cake and help arrange the seating so that everyone would have space to gather comfortably. Ethan grew excited about the event, asking questions about the games we might play and the stories we would share about his grandfather. I participated in the preparations by taking care of the larger expenses such as extra groceries and any last-minute supplies. The atmosphere in the house felt upbeat and collaborative as the date approached. Nicholas and Samantha discussed details late into the evenings, and Susan smiled more often than I had seen in years. Kayla and I exchanged glances across the table, both sensing the positive energy building around the gathering. The entire family looked forward to the celebration with genuine anticipation, treating it as a meaningful tradition that brought us closer together in the home we now shared. The final days before the party passed in a flurry of small tasks. Susan tested recipes in the kitchen, Nicholas confirmed the guest list, and Samantha arranged flowers she had picked up from the local market. Ethan practiced a short poem he wanted to recite, and the house filled with the scent of baked goods and fresh linens. I completed my own contributions by ensuring the backyard lights worked properly and the driveway had enough parking space for everyone. The mood remained light and focused, with everyone contributing in their own way. By the time the weekend of the party arrived, the house felt alive with purpose. Conversations during the last dinner before the event centered entirely on final touches and who would arrive first. Samantha reminded Nicholas to pick up the beverages on his way home from work, and he agreed without complaint. Susan expressed quiet satisfaction that the gathering would honor my father in the way he deserved. Kayla offered to arrive early to help set up tables, and Ethan bounced with excitement about seeing his cousins. I watched it all unfold, content that my efforts had created this space for the family to come together. The anticipation hung in the air as we wrapped up the final preparations that evening. Everyone retired to bed with thoughts of the next day, the house quiet, except for the occasional creak of floorboards. The routine that had defined our life in Boise felt complete, and the upcoming memorial birthday party promised to be a highlight of the year. The morning of the memorial birthday party arrived with clear autumn skies over Boise. I woke up early to double-check the backyard setup and make sure the extra chairs were arranged properly around the patio. Susan moved between the kitchen and dining room, finalizing the food trays with practiced efficiency. Nicholas returned from a quick errand with the last-minute beverages, placing them in the cooler while chatting about the expected number of guests. Samantha directed the placement of tablecloths and centerpieces, adjusting each item until everything looked neat and inviting. Kayla arrived right on time, carrying the finished cake, carefully setting it on the side table, and offering to help with last preparations. Ethan bounced around the house in his clean clothes, asking repeatedly when the first relatives would show up. By midday, the first guests began pulling into the driveway. Extended family members greeted each other warmly in the living room, sharing updates about their jobs and recent travels. I circulated among them, exchanging handshakes and brief conversations while keeping an eye on the overall flow. Nicholas handled the music playlist from his phone, selecting softer tracks that suited the occasion. Samantha moved gracefully between groups, smiling as she offered drinks and made sure no one felt left out. Susan stayed close to the food table, encouraging everyone to try the dishes she had prepared with care. Kayla stayed near me for much of the afternoon, occasionally commenting on how well the gathering seemed to be going. As the party progressed into the late afternoon, the energy remained steady and respectful. Small groups formed in the living room and backyard, with conversations drifting between memories of my father and current family news. Ethan played quietly with a few cousins on the grass, their laughter drifting through the open windows. Nicholas and Samantha stood together near the patio door, at one point speaking in low tones while glancing toward the main gathering area. I stepped inside to refill a water pitcher from the kitchen, passing through the hallway without drawing attention. That was when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen area, partially obscured by the open doorway. Samantha spoke first, her tone direct and matter-of-fact as she addressed Susan. She mentioned the ongoing financial pressures and how certain arrangements had become unsustainable over time. Nicholas added a few comments, agreeing with her points, emphasizing the need for changes moving forward. Susan responded quietly, trying to steer the discussion toward appreciation for the support that had been provided and suggesting patience during the family gathering. Samantha countered firmly, stating that expectations needed to be adjusted sooner rather than later. The exchange continued for several minutes, with Samantha using phrases that highlighted her view on long-term dependencies. I remained just outside the doorway, frozen in place as the words registered. The conversation revealed layers of dissatisfaction that had not surfaced in our daily routines. Nicholas backed his wife's perspective without hesitation, while Susan attempted to mediate with gentle reminders about family unity. Samantha's replies stayed consistent in tone, addressing both her husband and mother-in-law by their first names when making her points. The discussion grew slightly more pointed as Samantha expressed that certain contributions should no longer be taken for granted. Before I could decide whether to step away or enter the kitchen, footsteps approached from the living room. Kayla appeared in the hallway, noticing my expression and quietly asking if everything was all right. I motioned for her to listen briefly without saying anything. The voices from the kitchen continued now, including more specific references to household responsibilities and future planning. Susan tried once more to calm the exchange, but Samantha maintained her stance clearly. Nicholas supported her position, speaking in a way that showed alignment with his wife's outlook. The party continued outside, with guests unaware of the tension building in the background. Ethan ran past the hallway at one moment, calling out for more juice, momentarily breaking the intensity. Samantha and Nicholas eventually moved back toward the main area, their expressions composed as they rejoined the gathering. Susan followed a minute later, her face showing quiet concern but saying nothing further in that moment. Kayla and I exchanged a brief look before returning to the guests, both choosing to keep the incident private for the time being. As evening approached, the party maintained its surface warmth. More stories were shared, plates were cleared, and the cake was served amid appreciative comments. I participated outwardly while the earlier conversation replayed in my mind. The contrast between the public celebration and the private exchange in the kitchen created an undercurrent that only a few of us could feel. The gathering continued until the last guests began saying their goodbyes, leaving the house quieter but far from settled. As the evening light faded over the backyard, the party entered its later stage, with guests still mingling comfortably. Several relatives had moved inside to the living room, where the atmosphere stayed warm and conversational. I tried to maintain a normal expression while helping clear a few plates from the patio tables. Samantha and Nicholas positioned themselves near the center of the gathering, speaking with different family members in turn. Susan stayed close by, occasionally offering more dessert or refilling drinks with a composed smile. Kayla remained nearby, her glances toward me, showing quiet awareness of the earlier tension. Ethan had settled down with his cousins, showing them a simple card game on the floor. The shift happened gradually during one of the casual group conversations. Nicholas raised his voice just enough to draw attention from those nearby, mentioning how the family had relied on consistent support for household matters over recent years. Samantha joined in, smoothly adding that certain long-standing arrangements needed reevaluation because they created imbalance. She addressed the group directly, stating that it was time to discuss practical changes without waiting any longer. Nicholas nodded in agreement, reinforcing her points by talking about the weight of ongoing responsibilities and the need for everyone to contribute more equally moving forward. Susan attempted to intervene calmly, suggesting that the memorial gathering was not the right moment for such topics, and reminding everyone of the importance of staying united. Her words carried a gentle tone as she looked between her sons. Samantha responded without hesitation, turning towards Susan and saying, "Nicholas and I have thought about this carefully, Susan. We can't keep depending on the same pattern forever." Her voice remained steady and matter-of-fact, using her mother-in-law's first name in a way that underscored her seriousness. Nicholas backed her immediately, adding that the current setup had become unsustainable and that adjustments were necessary for the family's future stability. The words landed heavily in the room. A few relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances while others stayed silent, unsure how to respond. Samantha continued, emphasizing that expectations around financial help had grown too one-sided and that it was only fair to address it openly now. She spoke with clear conviction, directing parts of her comments toward me without using my name directly at first. Nicholas supported every point, describing how the Reliance had limited their own planning and independence. Susan tried once more to redirect the conversation, her voice softening as she urged them to consider the timing and the presence of extended family. Samantha countered firmly, "We've held back long enough, Susan. This affects our daily life too much to ignore." Kayla stepped forward at that moment, her tone sharp as she addressed both Nicholas and Samantha. She pointed out that the support provided had come from genuine care and sacrifice, not obligation, and that bringing it up this way during the memorial party showed poor judgment. Samantha turned to face her, directly maintaining her position without raising her voice, but making it clear she stood by her earlier statements. The exchange grew more direct, with Samantha reiterating that practical realities could no longer be overlooked. Nicholas sided completely with his wife, stating that he agreed with her assessment and that changes needed to happen. I finally spoke up, my voice steady despite the surge of disbelief. I asked them plainly why this discussion had to occur right then, in front of everyone on a day meant to honor our father. Samantha met my gaze and replied without apology, explaining that the issues had built up over time and delaying them further served no purpose. Her words carried an underlying sense of entitlement that made the betrayal feel even sharper. Nicholas added that he felt the same and that honesty in the moment was necessary. Susan looked visibly distressed, attempting to place herself between us while repeating that family should not air differences publicly like this. Her efforts to calm the situation had little effect, as Samantha and Nicholas remained aligned in their stance. Ethan, who had been watching from the edge of the room, walked closer and asked in a small voice what was happening. The question hung in the air, highlighting how the confrontation had spilled beyond the adults. Samantha glanced at her son briefly before returning her focus to the discussion, while Nicholas shifted uncomfortably but did not back down. The other guests began murmuring among themselves, the earlier warmth of the party now replaced by awkward tension. The confrontation continued for several more minutes, with Samantha pressing her points about fairness and long-term independence. She addressed Nicholas by his first name several times when reinforcing their shared view, and referred to Susan as Susan when countering her attempts to mediate. Kayla stood her ground, defending the contributions that had kept the household stable. I felt the full weight of the public betrayal settle in as more details emerged in their statements. The gathering that had started with respect for my late father had transformed into something entirely different. By the time the last words were spoken, the room felt heavier. Guests started making excuses to leave earlier than planned, offering brief goodbyes as they headed to their cars. Susan remained quiet afterward, her expression showing a mix of disappointment and helplessness. Kayla stayed close, her presence a silent show of support. Nicholas and Samantha collected a few items without further comment, their faces set in determination. The house emptied gradually, leaving behind the remnants of what was supposed to be a meaningful evening. The house felt unusually quiet once the last guest had driven away. I stood in the living room for several minutes, staring at the scattered plates and half-empty glasses that remained on the tables. Susan moved slowly through the space, gathering napkins without speaking much. Kayla helped clear the backyard, her movements deliberate as she folded chairs and stacked them against the fence. Nicholas and Samantha stayed in the kitchen area, talking in low voices while loading the dishwasher. Ethan had already gone upstairs to his room, the earlier excitement replaced by confusion after witnessing the exchange. I finally walked into the kitchen and faced them directly. The words came out measured but firm as I asked why they had chosen to bring up those issues so publicly during a day meant to remember our father. Samantha turned from the sink, meeting my eyes without hesitation. She replied that the timing might have been unfortunate, but the concerns were real and had been building for a long time. Nicholas stood beside her, nodding, as he added that they both felt the current situation limited their ability to plan independently. Samantha continued, explaining that relying on the same level of assistance year after year had created unrealistic expectations on their side. She addressed me calmly, stating that it was better to be honest now than to let resentment grow quietly. Susan stepped closer, her voice soft but urgent as she urged them to reconsider their approach and remember the support that had kept the household stable. Samantha responded by turning toward her mother-in-law and saying, "Susan, we appreciate what has been done, but Nicholas and I need to stand on our own feet eventually." Her tone carried the same steady conviction from earlier, using her mother-in-law's first name to emphasize the point. Nicholas reinforced her words, mentioning specific areas where the ongoing help had affected their budgeting decisions. The conversation grew more direct as Samantha listed several instances where she felt the balance had tipped too far in one direction. Kayla entered the kitchen at that moment, setting down a stack of folded tablecloths. She confronted them both, pointing out that the public setting had turned a private matter into something hurtful for the entire family. Samantha faced her without backing down, replying that avoiding the topic would only delay necessary changes. Nicholas sided with his wife again, stating that he stood behind her view completely. Susan tried once more to mediate, suggesting they sit down the next day to discuss calmly, but Samantha shook her head and said Susan waiting won't make the reality any different. I felt a cold clarity settle over me as their positions became fully clear. All the years of covering mortgage payments, utilities, and extra expenses suddenly appeared in a new light. I told them quietly that I had heard enough and that I would be stopping the additional financial support starting immediately. Samantha's expression shifted slightly, but she responded that such a sudden change would create real difficulties for their household. Nicholas echoed her concern, asking if I was serious about withdrawing help so abruptly. I confirmed that the decision was final after what had unfolded that evening. Later that night, after everyone had gone to their rooms, I sat at the desk in my bedroom and drafted a detailed email. I addressed it to the entire family, listing the total amount I had contributed toward the house and other expenses over the past several years, more than $120,000 in direct payments and mortgage assistance. I attached copies of bank transfer records and the informal agreement notes we had made when I first helped with the down payment. The message stated clearly that I expected repayment according to the original understanding and that I would pursue legal options if necessary. I sent the email just before midnight, then closed the laptop without waiting for replies. The following days brought a flood of responses. Susan called me privately, expressing worry about the growing division and asking if there was any room to reconsider. Kayla sent a short message of support saying she understood my position completely. Nicholas replied with a lengthy email defending their perspective and questioning the necessity of formal repayment. Samantha's response came separately, stating that the demand felt overly harsh given the family context and that they needed time to adjust their budget. She addressed Nicholas in her message as well, referring to him by his first name when discussing their joint situation. I met with Mr. Thompson, a local attorney in Boise who specialized in family financial disputes. 2 days later, he reviewed the transfer records and the email chain, confirming that the contributions could be treated as recoverable loans under state guidelines. He advised preparing formal demand letters and gathering additional documentation from the bank. I instructed him to proceed with the necessary paperwork to protect my interests. Throughout the week, the house remained tense. Nicholas and Samantha kept mostly to themselves, speaking in hushed tones whenever they passed through common areas. Susan tried to maintain normal routines, but her attempts at conversation often fell short. Kayla visited more frequently, offering quiet encouragement and helping with small tasks around the property. I focused on my work at the construction firm, channeling the disappointment into longer hours on current projects. The betrayal from the party had crystallized into a firm resolve that I would no longer carry the financial burden alone. The decision brought a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. For the first time in years, I began considering what my own future might look like without the constant responsibility for everyone else's stability. The path ahead felt uncertain but necessary after the events of that evening. The weeks following the email brought a noticeable shift in the daily atmosphere inside the house. Nicholas and Samantha began avoiding shared spaces as much as possible, taking meals upstairs or leaving early for errands. Susan tried to bridge the growing distance by preparing larger breakfasts and suggesting family conversations, but her efforts met with short replies. Kayla continued visiting regularly, sometimes staying overnight in the guest room to offer a buffer between the conflicting sides. I maintained my routine at the construction firm, focusing on site inspections and project deadlines to keep my mind occupied. Mr. Thompson contacted me with updates on the formal demand letters sent to Nicholas and Samantha. The documents outlined the exact total $120,000 in documented transfers and mortgage contributions, along with a reasonable repayment schedule based on their combined income. Samantha replied through her own attorney, arguing that the payments had been gifts rather than loans, and that enforcing repayment would create undue hardship. Nicholas sent a separate message expressing disappointment that things had reached this stage, though he stopped short of offering any concrete solution. The tension escalated when bank statements arrived, showing the mortgage payment I had covered for years was now overdue. Nicholas called me one evening, his voice strained as he explained that the lender had contacted them about missed installments. Samantha joined the call on speaker, stating firmly that this sudden withdrawal left them unable to cover the full amount on short notice. She addressed Nicholas directly during the conversation, saying, "Nicholas, we need to find another way because this change is too abrupt." Susan overheard part of the discussion and stepped in, pleading with both sides to find common ground before matters worsened. Samantha responded to her mother-in-law by saying, "Susan, we've already explained our position clearly. Continuing the old pattern isn't sustainable." I reminded them during that call that the original understanding had always included the expectation of eventual repayment once they stabilized. Mr. Thompson advised filing a civil claim in Boise District Court to recover the funds, citing the bank records and email correspondence as strong evidence. I authorized him to proceed with the lawsuit, providing all transaction histories and the informal notes from when I first helped secure the house. Court proceedings began several weeks later in a modest courtroom downtown. Nicholas and Samantha appeared with their attorney, presenting arguments that the contributions were familial support without formal loan terms. Their lawyer emphasized the emotional context of family assistance after our father's passing. Mr. Thompson countered by presenting clear documentation of transfers labeled as advances, along with my consistent role in covering the mortgage to prevent foreclosure. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully, noting the large sums involved and the lack of any written waiver of repayment. Samantha testified briefly, maintaining that the help had been given freely and that demanding it back now felt punitive. She referred to Nicholas as Nicholas when discussing their joint financial situation and addressed Susan's presence in the courtroom by noting her mother-in-law's difficult position. Nicholas supported her statements, describing how the sudden change had disrupted their budgeting and Ethan's routine. Susan was called as a witness and spoke quietly about her attempts to keep peace, though she avoided taking sides directly. Kayla provided supporting testimony about the visible sacrifices made over the years. The judge ultimately ruled in my favor, determining that the payments constituted recoverable financial assistance rather than unconditional gifts. The court ordered Nicholas and Samantha to repay the full amount according to a structured plan, including interest at the state minimum rate. Additional penalties applied for the missed mortgage payments that had accrued. Samantha's expression remained composed during the reading of the verdict, but her silence afterwards spoke volumes. Nicholas looked visibly shaken as they left the courtroom. In the months that followed the judgment, the practical consequences unfolded rapidly. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the house after continued missed payments. Nicholas and Samantha received notices requiring them to vacate the property within 60 days. Their credit scores dropped significantly due to the delinquent accounts, making it difficult to secure new financing. Samantha contacted me once more through email, stating that the outcome had created severe financial strain and asking if any compromise remained possible. Nicholas sent a separate note expressing regret over how events had escalated but stopped short of accepting full responsibility. Susan watched the developments with quiet sorrow, occasionally trying to speak with her younger son about finding a path forward. Kayla supported the legal process, fully helping me organize additional records when needed. I focused on separating my own finances, completely transferring the title arrangements, and ensuring no further obligations remained. The house that I had worked years to secure now stood as a symbol of the broken trust that had surfaced that night at the memorial party. The chapter felt heavy but final as the legal process concluded. The court order brought immediate and concrete changes to the household dynamics. Within days of the judgment, the bank sent formal foreclosure notices to the address in Boise. Nicholas and Samantha received multiple letters outlining the timeline for repayment or vacating the property. Susan received copies as well, since her name still appeared on some older documents, causing her visible anxiety during evening conversations. I reviewed the paperwork with Mr. Thompson, confirming that the structured repayment plan left little room for further delays. Nicholas attempted one last direct conversation in the living room one afternoon. He explained that the credit damage had already made it impossible to refinance or find alternative housing quickly. Samantha stood beside him, her posture rigid as she addressed the situation. She turned to Susan first and said, "Susan, this ruling is going to force us out of the only stable home Ethan has known." Then she looked toward me and stated that the full repayment amount plus penalties would take years to manage on their current salaries. Nicholas added that the stress was affecting his performance at work, with his sales numbers dropping due to the distraction. Samantha reinforced his point by saying Nicholas needs time to recover professionally before we can even begin tackling this debt. Kayla, who had come over that day, listened without interrupting at first. When Samantha finished, Kayla responded by reminding them that the original contributions had been made with the understanding of eventual independence. Susan tried to mediate again, suggesting a smaller monthly amount that everyone could live with, but Samantha shook her head and replied, "Susan, even that would stretch us too thin right now." Her tone remained controlled but carried clear frustration when she referred to her husband as Nicholas while discussing their limited options. The moving process began in earnest 2 weeks later. Nicholas rented a small truck and started packing belongings from the garage and spare rooms. Samantha organized boxes in the living room, labeling them efficiently while directing Ethan to sort his toys. The boy asked repeated questions about where they would live next, his confusion evident as he watched his parents dismantle the familiar space. Susan helped pack kitchen items with trembling hands, occasionally pausing to wipe her eyes. I stayed out of the packing areas, focusing instead on separating utility accounts and updating property records. By the end of the 60-day notice period, the house stood nearly empty of their possessions. Nicholas and Samantha loaded the final boxes into the truck under gray Idaho skies. Samantha paused near the front door and looked back at the living room one last time before stepping outside. Nicholas secured the truck bed and climbed into the driver's seat without saying goodbye. They drove away toward a modest 2-bedroom apartment they had found on the south side of Boise, an older complex with basic amenities and significantly higher monthly rent relative to their income. The financial fallout continued unfolding over the following months. Their credit scores dropped further as the foreclosure process advanced, affecting Nicholas's ability to secure better employment opportunities. Samantha took on part-time evening work at a local retail store to supplement their income, but the added hours left little time for family routines. Ethan transferred to a new elementary school closer to the apartment, losing contact with many of his previous friends and soccer teammates. Utility bills and medical co-pays began piling up, creating constant pressure that Susan heard about during occasional phone calls. I received regular updates from Mr. Thompson on the repayment enforcement. The court assigned a small monthly garnishment from Nicholas's paycheck, but the amount barely covered the accumulating interest. Samantha sent one final email requesting a temporary pause in collections due to their housing transition, addressing Nicholas in the message when describing their joint hardship. I forwarded the request to my attorney without response. Susan visited the new apartment a few times, returning each time with stories of cramped spaces and strained conversations. Kayla accompanied her on one occasion and later told me quietly that the environment felt tense and far removed from the stability the house in Boise had once provided. I listened but offered no suggestions for reconciliation. The legal separation of finances had created a clean break that I intended to maintain fully. Through it all, I continued my work at the construction firm with renewed focus. Projects that once felt secondary now became opportunities to rebuild my own savings and long-term plans. The house remained in my name after the title adjustments, providing a stable base for Susan and Kayla whenever they chose to stay. The contrast between my situation and the difficulties Nicholas and Samantha now faced served as a constant reminder of the choices made that night at the memorial party. The consequences had become undeniably real for everyone involved. The apartment on the south side of Boise became their new reality in the months after the move. Nicholas continued working his sales route with reduced commissions while dealing with the wage garnishment ordered by the court. Samantha balanced her part-time retail shifts with caring for Ethan, whose adjustment to the new school remained difficult. The smaller space forced daily compromises, shared bedrooms, limited storage, and constant awareness of tight budgets. Susan visited them twice more each time, returning home quieter than before, mentioning only brief updates about Ethan's schoolwork and the rising rent. Kayla accompanied her on the final visit and later described the atmosphere as one of ongoing strain without any sign of resolution. I made the decision clear during a short phone call with Susan. There would be no further financial assistance, no loans, and no returning to the previous arrangement. When Nicholas reached out once through text asking if any discussion remained possible, I replied with a single sentence confirming that the matter was closed. Samantha sent no additional messages after the court proceedings ended. Their silence spoke louder than any words could have. The family ties that once defined my daily responsibilities had been severed completely by the choices made that night at the memorial party. The house in Boise gradually returned to a quieter rhythm. Susan kept her routines in the kitchen and garden, while Kayla spent more evenings with us, sometimes staying in her old room on weekends. We shared simple meals without the underlying pressure of supporting additional households. I resumed projects I had set aside for years, upgrading the backyard patio, taking occasional weekend hikes in the nearby foothills, and even considering a certification course at the local community college to advance my engineering career. For the first time in 15 years, my decision centered on my own future rather than carrying everyone else. Ethan turned 9 that spring. I sent a card and a small gift through Susan, but made no effort to visit the apartment. Nicholas and Samantha faced continued challenges with their credit and housing stability, occasionally falling behind on rent according to the limited information that reached me. The foreclosure process on the original house concluded formally removing any remaining legal connections. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, only a steady acceptance that boundaries had become necessary. Looking back at the events that began with the memorial birthday party, one truth stands out clearly. When family members treat long-term support as an entitlement rather than a temporary bridge, the relationship shifts from care to burden. The public betrayal that evening revealed how easily gratitude can turn into expectation. By choosing to stop the one-sided contributions and enforcing the repayment through proper channels, I protected not only my financial future but also my peace of mind. Susan still hopes for some form of reconnection, but I have made my position final. Kayla understands completely and stands with the decision to move forward separately. The three of us now share the house with the calm that had been missing for years. There are no more urgent requests for extra funds, no late-night discussions about covering shortfalls, and no underlying resentment from carrying an unbalanced load. This experience taught me that true family strength comes from mutual respect, not one person's endless sacrifice. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to step back completely when that respect disappears. I no longer wonder what might have happened if I had continued giving without limits. The path I chose after that night has allowed me to rebuild on solid ground for myself, for Susan, and for Kayla. The truth that emerged at my father's memorial birthday party forced a necessary ending. And in that ending, I finally found the freedom to live for my own future